Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph, your friendly storyteller, and I'm here to take you on a cozy adventure tonight. Before we dive into our tale, I want to invite you to settle in, relax, and get comfortable. If you enjoy the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you snuggled up in bed, or maybe on the couch with a warm blanket? Let's get ready for a delightful journey together. But first, I have something special just for you. Introducing LipoSlend, the natural at-home liposuction method that supports healthy and steady weight loss while you sleep. Person in bed, imagine waking up feeling refreshed and lighter, thanks to our unique formula that harnesses the power of nature. With ingredients like sulforaphane, cis quadrangularis, and acetyl L-carnitine, LipoSlend works to stop fat from growing and helps your body manage weight effectively. And that's not all. When you order today, you'll receive 2 free bonuses. 1. Flawless Skin Secrets. Learn how to tighten loose skin and banish cellulite after your weight loss journey. 2. Primal Desserts. Indulge in delicious, fat-burning sweets that satisfy your cravings without the guilt. Plus, enjoy free shipping on every order. Ready to transform your nights and your body? Click the link in the description below to claim your discounted LipoSlend and start your journey to a healthier you today. Now let's begin our story. Once upon a time, I lived in a cozy little house with my family. It was a nice place, but it had some strange noises. At first, we thought it was just a squirrel or a raccoon scratching in the walls. But as the days went by, the sounds got weirder. They turned into whispers, like secrets being shared in the dark. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear soft voices talking to each other. It sent shivers down my spine, but I was too curious to be scared. One chilly evening, I was lying in bed, the moonlight spilling through my window. I heard the scratching again, but this time it was different. It felt like the walls were alive, breathing and whispering. I decided to get up and investigate. I tiptoed down the hallway, my heart racing. As I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear the whispers clearer. They were sad and lonely, like someone was calling out for help. "Help us," the voices seemed to say. "We're trapped." I felt a chill run through me. Who were they? Why were they trapped? I wanted to know more. The next day, I asked my parents about the house's history. They told me it was built over an old asylum. Many years ago, people who were sick in their minds lived there. Some of them never left. They said the spirits of those who suffered might still be around, wandering the halls of our home. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scratching returned, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and crept down the stairs. The whispers grew stronger, echoing in my ears. "Help us, find us, free us." I felt brave, so I followed the sounds. As I reached the living room, I noticed a strange shadow moving along the wall. It looked like a person, but it was dark and flickered like a candlelight. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow turned, and I saw a face, pale and sad. "We are lost," it said softly. "We need to be remembered." I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I realized these were the trapped spirits of the asylum, still longing for peace. "How can I help you?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and compassion. "Listen to our stories," the shadow replied. "Tell others about us. We just want to be free." I nodded, determined to help. I spent the next few nights talking to the spirits. They shared their stories of pain and hope, of dreams that were never fulfilled. I listened closely, my heart aching for them. I learned about their lives, their fears, and their wishes. Each story was like a puzzle piece, fitting together to reveal the truth of their suffering. As I shared their stories with my family, we decided to honor the spirits. We made a small memorial in our backyard, placing flowers and candles to remember them. We told their stories to anyone who would listen. The more we remembered them, the quieter the whispers became. It was as if the spirits were finally finding peace. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a warm breeze wash over me. I opened my eyes and saw the shadows again, but this time they were smiling. "Thank you," they whispered. "You have set us free." With that, the shadows faded into the moonlight, and the scratching in the walls stopped. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The house was still, and I knew the spirits were finally at rest. As I lay there, wrapped in my blankets, I thought about how the spirits thanked me. A comforting warmth filled my heart, and I smiled, thinking that maybe, just maybe, they were finally at peace. But soon, things took a different turn. A few nights later, I woke up to a loud bang. My heart raced as I sat up. It was still dark. In the quiet of the night, the house creaked around me, sounding like whispers from the walls. The familiar scratching returned, but this time it felt more frantic. I listened closely, trying to understand this new urgency. Then I heard something chilling. A soft voice, almost a whimper, came from the corner of my room. "Help, help us," it echoed like a trapped animal in a cage. I was scared but also curious. My feet felt like lead, but I had to know what was happening. I got up slowly, feeling every chill in the air. The shadows danced across my walls, stretching like long fingers trying to reach out. My flashlight flickered as I moved toward the sound. My breath came out in small puffs, and I took one shaky step after another. When I reached the corner of the room, my heart sank. I shone the light into the darkness, revealing a figure crouched there, thin and translucent. It looked like a little boy with tangled hair and eyes full of fear. He looked up at me, trembling. "I'm lost," he said. "Please help me find my way home." I felt a knot in my stomach. The boy looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Where is your home?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His lips quivered, and he pointed to the wall with a trembling hand. In the walls, behind the wall, fear coursed through me. What did he mean? I could feel the air getting colder, heavier. Suddenly, the room went dark as my flashlight died, plunging me into shadows. I stumbled back, the boy's figure swirling. "Find me!" he cried, and just like that, he vanished. I fell back onto my bed, pulling the covers tightly around me. What was happening? I couldn't understand why it was getting worse. Was it because I helped the other spirits? It felt like I had opened a door that should have stayed closed. The next morning, I tried to shake off the fear. I went to school, talked to friends, and pretended everything was normal. But my heart still raced whenever I thought of the boy. That night, I gathered my courage to face whatever was happening. I wanted to understand. Sitting on my bed, I closed my eyes and focused. "I'm ready," I whispered. As if the walls heard me, a low rumble started. The scratching grew louder, and the whispers rose to a cacophony of voices. It felt like a storm was brewing just outside my door. Suddenly, the room filled with cold air. I opened my eyes to see the boy again, but this time he wasn't alone. Shadows all around my room formed into ghostly figures, their faces twisted in pain. They wailed, and I felt their sorrow heavy in the air like a dense fog. Tears brimmed in my eyes as I understood they were whispering the same thing over and over. "Help us! Remember us! Who are you?" I shouted, clenching my fist, trying to keep my fear at bay. "What do you want? Why are you trapped?" One of the figures, a girl with long hair and tattered clothes, stepped closer. "We need you," she pleaded. "There are more of us. We can't leave until you find the truth." Her eyes shone with desperation, and something deep inside me knew I had to dig deeper into the history of this house and those who lived here before. That night, I searched online and found the asylum story. I learned that the spirits were linked to twisted experiments and lost dreams. They were innocent souls who had suffered in silence. The more I read, the more their pain wrapped around me like a dark cloud. Every page I read seemed to peel back layers of the past, revealing a horror that made my heart pound. The asylum had poor conditions. Patients were treated like animals, and many never got to leave. I felt a chill creep over me, realizing that each shadow I saw was a part of the terrible history that haunted this place. My dreams turned into nightmares, filled with the echoes of their sorrow. I saw flashes of the asylum, a dark hall filled with locked doors, shadows walking alone, whispering the names of those who had vanished without a trace. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart racing like a drum. One night, as I lay trembling in my bed, the boy appeared again. "You have to find the others," he said urgently, his his voice shaky. "They're still lost. They will never be free unless someone helps them remember." I nodded, filled with determination, but the fear bubbled inside me like molten lava. I had to face whatever was hidden in the walls. I took a deep breath and decided to confront the house's spirits, to unravel the stories that lingered within its shadows. With each passing night, I felt the spirits growing stronger. Their energy pulsed through the house, like electricity in the air. I could see flickers of their faces in the corners of my eyes, hear their sweet calls for help under the hum of the silence. The next evening, I gathered supplies, a notebook, candles, and my flashlight. I set the candles in a circle on the floor and sat in the middle, heart pounding in my chest. "I'm here," I called out. "I want to help you." The room darkened as if the shadows absorbed all light. The air thickened with anticipation. I felt the ghosts gather around me. Their whispers danced just beyond my hearing, pulling me into a web of secrets. Then, one by one, the shadows stepped forward, and their stories flooded out. "Help us," the voice of the girl came first. "We were patients, but we are not forgotten. They kept us in small rooms. We were scared and alone. They did things to us, horrible things." Her voice trailed off into a gasp, and I could feel the weight of her sorrow. Next came a man with a deep, booming voice, his spirit shaking with anger. "They took my life away," he thundered. "I was not crazy. They locked me away for speaking the truth." "Find the truth." I jotted their stories down, each word feeling like a lifeline thrown into dark waters. The more I wrote, the more the air danced with energy. It was almost like I could feel their pain easing as they shared their truth. But just as I felt a flicker of hope, the room got colder. The shadows began to writhe and twist, their whispers turning into chaotic shrieks. The tension grew thick, and I realized they were becoming restless, angry that their stories had been hidden for so long. "Stop, please," I shouted, feeling the fear intertwine with the shadows. The atmosphere shifted, and the sound of scratching erupted around me, loud and frantic. I could feel unseen hands tugging at my clothes, pulling me deeper into the chaos. The boy appeared again, but he looked different. His eyes were wide, and he seemed to flicker like a candle in the wind. "They're angry," he cried. "You have to be careful. They can smell fear." I didn't know what to do. I could feel their desperation, but the fear squeezed my throat like a vice. All I knew was that I could not let them take me. I had to find a way to calm them, to help them find peace, before I became another shadow, another lost soul inside these walls. As I closed my eyes, I took a deep breath. "I will remember you," I shouted into the abyss. "You are not forgotten. I won't let anyone forget your stories." The room trembled, and the shadows paused, their energy shifting. I felt their attention turn toward me, lingering on my promise. It was a small flicker of hope, but I could feel the connection. They needed to be heard and remembered. I opened my notes, reading their names aloud, bringing their stories to life. Suddenly, the atmosphere began to change. The figures started to settle. They listened, captivated by the sound of their own names. Each name felt like a key, unlocking chains that had bound them for too long. As I continued speaking, the shadows grew softer, and I could hear the whispers of gratitude weaving through the air. "Thank you," they murmured, their voices growing lighter. "We are not alone." But just as peace started to fill the air, a loud crash shook the house. My heart dropped as I turned toward the source of the noise. A door in the hallway slammed open with a violent force, revealing a pitch-black void beyond. I felt a pull, as if something from the darkness was reaching out, a darkness that felt alive and hungry. The voices turned frantic. "Run! It's coming!" The panic in their tones sent chills down my spine. I could sense this was no ordinary force. It was something darker, an entity that thrived on fear and suffering, feeding off the souls trapped in the walls. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What had I awakened? My instinct screamed for me to run, but the friendly spirits behind me urged me to stay. "We can help each other," they cried, "but you must face it." Deep down, I knew I had to confront this darkness. With trembling fingers, I reached for a candle, holding it out before me like a shield. The flickering flame gave me a glimpse of hope against the encroaching shadows. "I am not afraid of you," I yelled, trying to muster every ounce of courage. The darkness laughed, a low, echoing sound that reverberated through the entire house. "You think your little light can defeat me?" it taunted. I felt it creep closer, wrapping around me like a snake, pulling the air from my lungs. Shadows twisted into figures that seemed to grasp for me, reaching out, whispering words of despair. "Stay back!" I shouted, holding my candle higher, the light flickering with urgency. The spirits rallied behind me, their energy fueling my resolve. Together, they screamed, "We are stronger together!" In that moment, I understood this darkness thrived on isolation. It wanted to separate me from the spirits so it could consume us both. I would not let it happen. "You have no power here," I declared, my voice steady. "We will remember. We will be heard." The candle's flame grew strong, illuminating the room with a brilliant light. The darkness recoiled, hissing as if burned by the light. The figures behind me surged forward, pouring their energy into the light, creating a shield around us. But the dark force lashed out, thrashing with anger and rage. The air crackled with energy, filling the room with the scent of smoke and fear. I could feel the shadows reaching for me, trying to pull me into their depths. As the clash escalated, I focused on the spirits around me, their faces determined and fierce. Gritting my teeth, I called out their names again, louder this time. Each name sparked a new flame of courage within me. "You are not lost. You are not forgotten." With every name I shouted, the light grew brighter, repelling the shadows with a force that left them howling in fury. I had to keep going to remind them of their strength and why they fought to be free. "Remember who you are," I cried. "You are brave. You are strong. Together, we can break free from this darkness." The shadows thrashed wildly, but slowly, I could see them beginning to dissolve. The energy surged like waves crashing against the shore. Together, we were pushing back against the storm. The darkness screamed, a deafening noise that echoed through the house, shaking the very foundations. I could feel its grip loosening, the shadows retreating as the light surged forward, devouring the darkness piece by piece. Just when I thought it was over, a deep, chilling presence appeared. A figure emerged from the shadows, taller and more imposing than the rest. Its eyes glowed like embers, cold and hungry. "You cannot save them," it hissed, its voice a combination of anger and despair. "They belong to me." But this time, I stood firm. "No, they belong to the world. They belong in the light," I declared, pouring every ounce of love and remembrance into my words. "Your reign of fear ends here." As I spoke, the spirits behind me gathered their strength, their chants and whispers intertwining with my voice. "We are not victims," they shouted, echoing my resolve. "We are free. We are alive." The light burst forth like a supernova, radiating through the room, enveloping everything in warmth and life. The darkness shrieked, twisting and writhing as the light consumed it. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Then the light erupted with a force that shook the air like thunder. It surged forward, blinding in its brilliance, pushing against the shadows that were still clawing at my feet. The cold presence of the dark figure snarled, its eyes narrowing as the light began to engulf it. I could hear its rage rising, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can fight me?" it bellowed, its voice like grinding stones. "I am the fear that lurks in every corner." I felt the weight of its words. The fear was real, and it had dug deep into my heart over the years. But in that moment, I realized something important. I had faced my nightmares, and I had chosen to help those who were suffering. Fear is only as strong as you let it be, I shouted, the words bursting from me like hot flames. I could feel the spirits rallying around me, their energy intertwining with mine. "You are not my master. You do not own me." As I declared my defiance, The shadows bucked and writhed, the dark figure recoiling as if my voice were a physical blow. Its glowing eyes flickered with rage, but I pressed on, feeling strength surge within me. You have fed off the pain of others for too long. This ends tonight. The dark entity shrieked, the sound echoing off the walls, a cacophony of rage and despair. It lashed out, attempting to turn the spirits against me, whispering lies that clawed at the corners of my mind. They will never forget their pain. You are weak. You cannot save them. But I refused to listen. No, I screamed, my voice rising above its chilling whispers. You are wrong. They do not have to be defined by their suffering. They have stories to tell, dreams to live, and I will help them find their way. The shadows roared, swirling around me like a storm of despair and anger. I could feel their icy tendrils brushing against my skin, trying to pull me down into the depths of their sorrow. I staggered backward, but the light within me flared even brighter, illuminating the room in a warm glow mingled with hope. Suddenly, the room shook violently. The walls began to ripple as if alive, and shadows slithered from every nook and cranny. A chill swept through me as I realized the darkness was trying to pull the very structure of the house apart, aiming to trap me within an abyss of despair and fear. Stay together. Focus on the light. I urged the spirits. Their faces briefly glowed like fireflies, and with renewed determination, they pulled closer, surrounding me in a protective circle. Together, we summoned our strength, and I could feel their silent chants weaving into mine. The air grew thick with their energy, forming a radiant shield around us. But the dark figure was relentless. You cannot hope to defy me. It roared, slashing through the air with long, shadowy tendrils. Just then, it lunged forward, aiming for me with horrifying speed. I barely had time to react as it reached out, cold fingers grazing my arm, sending a paralyzing chill straight to my core. In that instant, the memories flooded my mind, images of the spirits trapped in the asylum, their eyes filled with hopelessness. Their pain felt like a cold blade digging into my heart. I gasped, struggling to draw breath as terror clutched at my throat. But then, a flicker of resolve surged within me. I closed my eyes, thinking of every story I had heard, of the lost boy, the girl, and the man who had faced such horrors. I remembered their hope, their longing for freedom. I allowed their memories to wash over me, filling me with warmth. Remember, I shouted, breaking through the darkness. Remember who you are. You are not just shadows. You are the living echoes of a past that deserves to be remembered. As I spoke, the shadows began to hesitate. I could feel a shift in the air. The dark figure paused, its cold grip faltering. The spirits surged forward, their voices rising in a chorus of strength. We are here. We will not vanish. The dark entity screamed in protest as the candle's flame flared higher, igniting the energy around us. I clutched the candle tightly, raising it high like a beacon. The light pushed back against the darkness, illuminating contours and revealing the angry faces calling out for release. Together, we are powerful, I cried out, feeling a connection with each spirit. We will break these chains. You don't own us. With every word, the shadows pulled back, recoiling from the light. No, this is not possible, the dark presence wailed, its voice cracking as it began to dissolve under the brightness. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, shaking the very foundations. I gasped as I realized that the walls were crumbling, pieces of plaster falling like snow around us. I could sense the darkness weakening, and a glimmer of hope flickered in my heart. But then a surge of wind blasted through the room, knocking me off my feet. The candle flew from my hands, extinguished in an instant. I fell backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps as shadows surged around me, pulling and twisting. I scrambled back, my heart racing wildly. The darkness surged toward me, desperate to reclaim control. I could feel despair creeping in once more, wrapping around my heart with icy fingers. But just as it was about to swallow me whole, the spirits responded, their energy pulsating, wrapping around me, forming a protective barrier. "Don't give in," they urged, their whispers taking on a fierce intensity. "We will overcome this together. Trust in the light." Clenching my fists, I drew strength from them. "I won't let you down," I shouted, forcing the fear out of my voice. "I'll remember you. We are stronger together." With that declaration, I felt the air shift. Shadows began to recede, twisting into shapes that couldn't hold their form. The dark figure screamed one last time, a sound filled with rage and despair that echoed through the walls, causing the floor beneath me to tremble. As the chaos reached a fever pitch, light erupted once more from within me. I didn't have a candle to guide me, but I held the spirits' memories close. Their hopes and dreams became my beacon. With a swift motion, I closed my eyes and embraced the warmth of their energy. "Together," I shouted, feeling the boundaries between the living and the lost blur. The golden light surged forth, launching itself at the darkness. It burst through like waves crashing on a shore, flooding the room with brilliant rays that pierced the shadows and sent them into a frantic retreat. As the light filled the space, the horrid figure shrieked, "You cannot escape me. This is not over." But the words dissolved into a haze as the shadows imploded, the energy scattering with a thunderous roar. I gasped, the rush of light and hope invigorating me, lifting my spirits high. Then, silence enveloped the room. I opened my eyes, slowly rising to my feet. The air grew warm, and the chilling presence that had haunted me was gone. For the first time, I could hear the soft sighs of relief from the spirits around me, their forms shimmering like stars against the darkened corners of the room. "We're free," the little boy said, his voice light and filled with gratitude. "You did it!" Tears welled in my eyes as I watched the figures beam with joy, their sorrow evaporating into the air like mist under the sun. "We can finally move on," the girl whispered, her face glowing with peace. But even as the spirits began to dissipate into the light, I felt an uneasy twist in my gut. Something nagging deep within me told me this wasn't the end. What about the dark entity that had caused so much pain? I opened my mouth to speak, to ask if they had truly defeated it. But before I could, a new darkness flickered at the edges of my vision. My blood ran cold when I realized the shadows were stirring once again. "Wait!" I cried out, trying to make sense of the swirling energy that lurked at the edges of the room, creeping back with a vengeance. It twisted and morphed, drawing near like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, their outlines dark and ominous. "It's bringing reinforcements." The boy's voice trembled with fear as they started slinking back into the room, moving with a sinister grace. "No, you said we were free," I shouted, panic rising within me. But the shadows continued to encroach, their whispers rising to a roar, filled with anger and a promise of revenge. Despite my fear, something deep inside me still burned bright. If this darkness is back, then I must deal with it. I resolved, determination washing over me. I remembered the warmth of the light, what the spirits taught me about unity and strength. I could not let fear win again. I could not let these souls slip back into despair. "Together, everyone come," I yelled, reaching deep to tap into the energy we had just forged. The spirits seemed to respond, though their joyful forms began to dim as the shadows advanced. "Fight with me. Don't let them take you back," I implored, my heart racing. Their luminous spirits flickered, and they turned to face the oncoming darkness. With every fiber of my being, I focused on the memories we had created, the bond we had formed, and the grip of despair I refused to succumb to. "We can push back. We can reclaim our stories." The shadows hesitated, but then lunged with renewed ferocity. "No one leaves. You belong to me," the dark figure roared, the voice now a cacophony of many. Raising my voice to the heavens, I commanded, "We do not belong to you. You will never own us." As I called upon my strength and the spirit's energy ignited, light burst forth again. This time, it transformed into a brilliant shield that exploded outward, catching the shadows in its radiant embrace. But the darkness fought back, sinister forms coiling and merging, creating a beast that overshadowed everything. Fear rose like bile in my throat as the grotesque entity twisted, looming over me with a gaping maw. "Watch as I consume your hope," it hissed, sharp claws stretching toward me with deadly precision. I braced myself. Suddenly, the room tremored as if the very essence of the house was caught in our battle. I felt the connection between the spirits surge within me, a pulse of energy that had grown stronger. It rushed forth, mingling with the light and revealing the shadows in startling clarity. They were forces of pain, remnants of despair that needed to be released. "Stand tall," I yelled, feeling strength at my core deepen as waves of light hammered against the beast. "You do not frighten us. This is our home." The shadow beast shrieked with rage as the light pushed back harder. I called upon every soul trapped within the dark times, every memory of suffering I had released before. "Remember your truth. Your lives matter. You have power." The very air shimmered with warmth and light, each spirit lending their strength to the fight. The dark figure wavered, its form looking less solid, more like a mirage under pressure. "You will fall," it bellowed. "I will reclaim this place." But I felt the spirits rise up, their courage sending ripples through the air, forcing the shadows back. The room illuminated with an ethereal glow, and the weight of the darkness began to lift. "Now!" I shouted, raising my hands in desperation and unity. "Together, let's show them the light of our truth." The light surged wildly, erupting like a supernova, bright and blinding. The darkness recoiled, shrieking as the waves of energy crashed into it, consuming the despair it had forged from the lost souls and feeding on their pain. Rays of light pierced through every corner of the space, illuminating the tortured remains of the shadows scattered like ash. I felt an overwhelming sense of release and triumph spreading through me as the darkness started to unravel, flickering like a dying flame. "Give it all you have." I could hear the echoes of their voices, shouting with fierce determination. Hope was flooding back into my heart. This was no mere battle. It was a reclaiming of their stories. With that, I pushed harder, and with one final shriek, the dark entity shattered into 1,000 pieces, dissolving into the very air around us. And just like that, the room fell silent. I stood there, gasping, the weight of fear lifting from my shoulders. The warm light settled around us, wrapping me in a cocoon of safety. I could feel the spirits draw near again, their forms gathering close, radiant in their release from the chains of this place. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice like a soft breeze. "You've set us free." As those words drifted in the air, I became aware of a heavy, unsettling presence lingering at the edges of the room. Though the shadows had been vanquished, a spine-chilling cold hung in the corners, whispering hints of something yet to come. I could almost hear it breathing, low and deep, waiting in the silence for a moment of weakness. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice breaking the stillness. The spirits looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The little girl, her face pale but determined, stepped closer to me. "We don't know. Sometimes, when a darkness is defeated, something else rises in its place." I could feel the air shift, a strange vibration thrumming through the floorboards. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, not the dark figures we had faced, but something different, lurking and stalking, filled with a restless hunger that made my skin crawl. The room felt alive, and not in a comforting way. "Stay close," I whispered, my heart racing. The spirits moved in a tight circle around me, their luminous forms casting a faint glow as we prepared for whatever might come next. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like claws running against the wooden beams of the walls, echoing like a distant memory of terror. "What is that?" I breathed, barely able to voice my fear. The little boy's eyes widened. "It's something that feeds on fear. When the darkness fades, it often leaves behind remnants, hungry for more. I could feel a rising tide of dread pooling in my stomach, an instinct warning me that we were far from safe. The scratching intensified, darting from one corner to another, filling the room with an almost palpable tension. The shadows seemed to gather again, a thick mass coiling around us, constricting like a snake. "Turn it back!" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. The spirits concentrated, their combined energy creating a barrier of flickering light. Yet the scratching continued, now joined by hushed whispers that twisted like smoke around me. "Join us, stay with us, you cannot escape." The words slithered through the air, chilling my bones. "Do not listen," I yelled, clenching my fists. "You are strong. Remember your stories." But as I spoke, I felt the temperature drop further, a thick mist beginning to seep in from the corners of the room. It weaved around our feet, creeping like fingers made of frost. I inhaled sharply. I could see my breath hanging in the air. The spirits briefly flickered, struggling against the encroaching cold. "It's trying to drain our light," the girl said, panic rising in her voice. "We need to fight it back." Resolutely, I drew upon the memories that had ignited my strength before. "Focus on your light. Remember who you are," I shouted, my heart thumping loudly in my chest. I could feel negative energy pouring into the room, devouring our hope, feeding on the fear I'd try to chase away. With the spirit's energy pulsating around us, I felt the weight of the whispers grow heavier. "You'll never find peace. You belong to us," they hissed, sending a shiver coursing through my body. The walls trembled as they spoke, and the mist thickened, wrapping around my legs, pulling me down like treacle, sticky and unyielding. Just as I was about to cry out again, the boy screamed, "It's coming!" He pointed toward the far wall, where the mist writhed violently, swirling like a storm about to break. My heart dropped as I saw a shape emerging through the fog, a grotesque figure, hunched and twisted, with eyes that burned like cold flames. It stood at least twice my height, covered in a dark, slick substance that dripped onto the floor, steaming and hissing as it made contact. "Feed us," it rasped, its voice a horrible amalgamation of whispers that clawed at my mind. "We will keep you safe if you come and stay." "No!" I shouted, the word bursting forth with defiance. "I will not give in. We will not stay." The figure snarled, revealing teeth that were sharp and glistening, framed by a mouth that stretched far too wide. "You cannot escape the hunger," it growled, inching closer, filling the room with an overpowering dread that threatened to crush my spirit. "Hold together," I called out, rallying the spirits who flickered with fear, but, even so, drew closer to me. "We've faced worse. We can do this." But as I spoke, I felt cold, clammy tendrils reaching toward me, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me into the icy grass. With every tug, I felt my energy waning, a deep sense of despair creeping into my heart. "I can't, this is too much." The spirits began to tremble, their glow dimming under the figure's chilling presence. But then, just as despair threatened to swallow us, I remembered the candle, the light, the power of their stories. "Remember why you're here," I shouted, unsure if they could hear me over the din of despair that filled the room. "You are brave. You are free. Stand with me, so we can break this cycle." Their fear momentarily subsided, and I saw their light brighten, flickering back to life as we joined our energy. I could feel warmth returning. It nestled against the coldness creeping into my skin, filling the void that had been left behind. With a great surging cry, I thrust my hands out as if summoning all the light within us. "We will not be consumed. You do not control our fate." The figure paused, its eyes narrowing, uncertainty creeping into its expression as the light coalesced, flooding the room in a radiant wave. I could almost hear the spirits whispering their stories, their strength merging with mine, booming together against the dark entity that sought to consume us. "Keep fighting," I urged, feeling the pulse of our combined energy swell. "Let your stories break the chains of fear. The room vibrated violently, and the figure's form began to dissolve into the light, slowly at first, but then faster, as if each word we spoke weakened its grip on reality. But it snarled, baring its teeth, determination flickering in its burning eyes. "You cannot escape. I will always be here, lurking within the shadows." "Maybe," I shot back, my voice unwavering. "But you will never own us." With one final shout, I directed the light to surge forward, pushing against the monstrous figure, engulfing it in a torrent of brilliance. The air crackled with energy as I felt the pressure of the shadow dissipate, its form collapsing like a house of cards, scattering into the void from which it came. Just as the darkness faded entirely, a cold gust swept through the room, and for a brief second, I thought I could hear a faint laughter echoing, a sound that sent prickles of unease down my spine. But I couldn't dwell on it. As calm began settling over us, I held tightly to the spirits, their safety my priority. "Is it over?" I whispered, my voice trembling with the aftermath of the battle. Yet still, the shadows shifted uneasily, swirling back and forth, whispering tantalizing threats. "It is not finished," a voice hissed from the depths. "We will return." Panic surged through me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to stave off the dread that threatened to overtake me. But in that darkness, I felt a wave of determination rising within. "No," I declared firmly, my heart pounding like a war drum. "I won't let it end this way." The spirits rallied behind me, their forms glowing brighter with every ounce of courage we could muster. I felt a rush of energy. This wasn't just a fight for me. It was for each of them, every story intertwined with mine, creating an unbreakable bond. And so, I prepared myself, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The room grew still, a heavy silence pressing down as I took a deep breath, feeling the spirits crowd around me. The air felt charged, electric, humming with potential and danger. Then, without warning, the shadows began to twist and churn, responding to the darkness I had thought defeated. "Stay together," I hissed, clenching my fists as I tried to focus on the light we had forged together. But as I glanced around, anxiety twisted in my gut. The dark tendrils crawled along the walls, creeping like spiders testing their webs, drawing closer and closer as they reached for me. I felt vertigo set in, as if the very ground was tilting beneath my feet. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind, slithering through the cracks of my confidence. "You cannot hide," they taunted. "We are everywhere. We will always be with you." I shook my head vigorously, trying to dispel the encroaching dread. "No, you're nothing but remnants of fear," I yelled into the darkness, my voice wavering but determined. The spirits wavered too, their light flickering dangerously. The shadows twisted, taking shapes that sent age-old terror coursing through my veins. I saw figures coalesce from the vaporous dark, twisted versions of people long lost, faces etched with despair and hollow eyes that bore into my soul, screaming silently for help. "Join us," they echoed, their voices melding into a chorus that became a cacophony of anguish that clawed at my sanity. "Stop it," I shouted, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You are not real. You cannot take me." But the figures persisted, reaching out with gnarled fingers that seemed to stretch toward me, trailing a chill that seeped into my bones. Each step they took felt like a reminder of every painful loss I had experienced. "This is your past, your regrets. Embrace it," they spoke, their voices dripping with mockery. Fear clutched at me like icy fingers wrapped around my throat. I stumbled backward, the spirits surrounding me, shrinking in light. "Don't listen," the little girl urged, her shimmering form dimming under the weight of the shadows. "They'll try to drown you in your memories." Gathering my strength, I remembered the bond we shared, the light of hope that shone bright even in the darkest of times. "You don't know my memories," I countered, voice steadying. "I shaped them. I will not be afraid." But as I spoke, the shadows began to swirl with louder intensity, their whispers transforming into menacing roars, each syllable swelling with anger. You think you can defy your past? We are the weight you carry. We are your future. Just when I thought I could hold my ground, a piercing shriek erupted from the darkness, a sound that reverberated through the very walls of the room. Fear gripped my heart as the ground trembled, splintering beneath me. The walls began to pulse like a beating heart, and I could see cracks spreading, darkness pouring from them like blood seeping from a wound. I gasped as the shadows morphed and expanded, engulfing everything in sight, transforming the room into a vast, dark void that twisted my perception of reality. One moment I was surrounded by light and warmth. The next, I was suspended in an endless chasm, floating in a sea of despair and echoes of long-forgotten cries. "This is where you belong," the twisted, faceless figures said. Their voices melded into a sinister chorus that reverberated ominously. "Here, you are nothing. Here, you are lost." I felt a deep pull, like a weight dragging me down into the darkness, threatening to pull me under into the murky depths of hopelessness. "No!" I shouted, even as the chill wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I refused to be lost. Suddenly, the little girl stepped forward, her form pushing against the tides of darkness, shining with renewed energy. "Together," she called, her voice cutting through the noise. "We can fight this." Drawing upon her courage, I felt the spirit's energy rise once more. But the shadows retaliated with ferocity, their tendrils snapping like whips in the air, whipping the little girl backwards. She screamed, and my heart shattered. "You see," the darkness cooed, its voice now sultry and insidious. "Alone, you are nothing. You can't protect them. They will always fall to the shadows." In that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to give in, to surrender to the despair that lay heavy in my chest. Doubt consumed me, wrapping around my heart tighter than the cold fog pressing in. But just as I was about to succumb, a deep-seated rage ignited within. "No," I growled, fighting against the crushing weight. "I won't let fear control me." With a surge of unmatched power, I focused every ounce of my spirit, calling the energy that held the light of our combined memories. I imagined each face, their hopes, their laughter, the love that connected us. I visualized the warmth growing again, brighter than the void surrounding me. The darkness reeled back as radiant light burst forth, splintering the shadows like glass shattering under pressure. "You are stronger than this." With a final cry, I unleashed that energy, pushing it forward against the shadowy figures that writhed and shrieked. The light collided with the darkness, exploding with a brilliance that made the very air crackle and spark. The figures collapsed into themselves, shrieking, fading into wisps of shadow, leaving behind a formless void that seemed to tingle with restless energy. But even as victory seemed within my grasp, I felt a pull, a deep tug within the void that remained, and I realized the battle was far from over. The darkness hadn't left entirely. It was just biding its time, waiting to strike when I least expected it. The walls echoed ominously as the very structure of the house groaned under the pressure of our fight. Shadows danced on the periphery, flitting between the fleeting light, teasing at the edges of my consciousness in a way that made my skin crawl. "This isn't finished, not yet," they taunted, lingering just out of sight, whispering promises that sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, I felt another tremor ripple through the ground, but this time, it was more violent, like a warning rumble before a storm, shaking everything with a force that nearly knocked me to the ground. The room swayed, and I could see the floorboards splintering beneath me, twisting and curling as if alive and in agony. My heart raced as my gaze shot upward to where the ceiling creaked and groaned. "We need to get out," I shouted, fear spilling from my lips. The spirits floated closer, clasping together, their light dim but steadfast. But before we could make a move, the shadows erupted, pouring from the cracks in the walls like ink spilled on a paper, swallowing everything in a black tide. I instinctively took a step backward as the shadows clawed their way, crossing the threshold from the walls to the room, each tendril spinning like a massive, dark serpents searching for something to devour. "Help us!" the little boy yelped, his voice rising above the chaos, panic creeping through his words. The spirits clung to me tighter, their shimmer flickering like a candle threatened by the wind. "We have to escape." I turned, my heart pounding, ready to take charge of my own fate once again. But it was then that I saw it. A flickering figure emerging from the shadows, moving with an unsettling grace that made my blood run cold. "Did you think it was over?" It was the same twisted voice, dripping with malice, a wretched reminder of the darkness that had haunted me. From the depths of despair, it began to take shape, a low, grotesque silhouette that had no clear form but exuded an aura of terror, with hollow, burning eyes locked directly on me. I froze as the figure stepped forward, the shadows parting to reveal the full extent of the nightmare. "You cannot escape the darkness your past created," it hissed, its voice echoing in my mind, reverberating with the weight of every painful memory I had ever tried to forget. In that moment, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The entity drew closer, stretching out its hand, which twisted and contorted into a shadowy claw. "Join me in darkness. Let go of your light." The little girl's scream pierced through my resolve, snapping me back. "No, we will not let it win. We are stronger together." So, with every spare ounce of energy, I summoned our light, flaring it against the advancing darkness. "We won't back down," I shouted, the defiance pooling in my chest. The shadows roared in defiance, and I felt a blast of ferocity sweeping toward us. The room began to flicker violently, lights dimming and brightening, pushing against the tide as I stood firm, ready to fight. But something in me began to quaver, a small voice whispering that maybe the shadows had a point. Maybe the darkness was an inescapable truth, one that couldn't be fought but had to be accepted. Doubt seeped in, and I fought to push it away. "I am more than my darkness," I reminded myself. As I locked eyes with that hideous figure, I saw a flicker of uncertainty within it, a crack in its facade of pure malice. "You are nothing without your fears," it taunted, but as it spoke, I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. "Stop!" I screamed, gathering every ounce of defiance. "I will not be afraid. I will stand." With that final proclamation, I forced that light outward, pushing back against the darkness once and for all. The pulse of hope surged through me, taking shape in a blinding flash that filled the room and momentarily shattered the terrible hold the shadowy figure had over us. The darkness wailed, a shriek that clawed its way into my mind and sent waves of anxiety crashing against my heart. I couldn't let the fear take hold again. I had come too far, and I wouldn't let any remnants of that past drag me back into despair. It was time to reclaim my story, to rewrite the ending on my own terms. The shadows convulsed, swirling wildly, and I felt a sudden release, a rush of clarity filling my mind as I took one definitive step forward. "You will not control me anymore." The room quaked beneath my feet as the light exploded from within, forcing the darkness back into retreat, piece by piece. The walls trembled violently, cracking further, shadows splintering away, leaving only the echoes of despair that had threatened to consume me. But I couldn't ignore that unease lingering at the back of my mind, an unsettling voice that whispered persistent doubts that threatened to seep through the victory. As the last tendrils of dark energy began to dissolve, I couldn't shake the sensation that this was only the beginning, a prelude to something more sinister lurking just beneath the surface. With a final surge of energy, I coiled the light tightly around me, preparing for the next wave, the inevitable return of the shadows. I felt the spirits gathering their strength, pushing back against the darkness, and yet I couldn't help but wonder, what other forms would this darkness take? What other shadows still lay in wait? Breathing heavily, I faced the fading darkness with a pounding heart. "You may retreat now," I proclaimed, determination firing my veins. "But I will be ready." And as the last remnants dissolved into the air, I knew this battle might be won. But the war against the shadows within and without was far from over. As I turned, prepared to lead the spirits to safety, The chilling laughter echoed once more, swirling around me, a reminder of the darkness that would never truly be gone. In that moment, I felt an icy wave wash over me, uncertainty creeping at the edges of my resolve. And with every heartbeat, I realized I was still very much a part of this fight. There were more shadows ahead, lurking, watching, waiting for their chance to return. And I prepared myself, knowing I was not alone. Together, we would face whatever came next. Together, we would rise against the night. But as the last remnants of darkness receded, a chilling silence enveloped the room, thicker than before, like the calm before a storm. The air felt heavy and pregnant with anticipation, making it hard to breathe. I glared into the corners, where shadows still danced, taunting me with flickers of malice and an inkling of uncertainty. My heart raced as I took a step forward, compelled by an invisible force. With each step, the temperature dropped, the air turning frigid, curling around me like fingers of ice. A low hum, like the sound of distant thunder, filled the space around me, vibrating through my bones. "Can you feel that?" I whispered to the spirits, searching their glowing eyes for assurance. "Something's coming." Suddenly, a new sound pierced the stillness, the faint echo of laughter, high-pitched and maniacal, reverberating off the walls. It was not the laugh of joy, but a sinister mockery that clawed at the edges of my mind, sending shivers racing down my spine. Let it in, the voice sang, dripping with malice. The room seemed to dim further, swallowing the light from the spirits, leaving only an eerie glow that flickered like a dying flame. My pulse quickened, and I turned to look at them, my throat dry as I struggled to find my voice. "We need to move. We can't stay here." But the spirits lingered, their forms wavering, torn between the chaos and some unseen pull that kept them anchored in place. I felt panic rising in my chest as tendrils of shadow crept back into view, slithering along the floor like snakes, ready to strike. "Come on," I urged, reaching out to them. "Don't let the darkness take you." As if answering my call, the shadows surged forward, forming grotesque figures that loomed larger and more menacing than before. The disembodied laughter intensified, echoing like a nightmarish symphony. My eyes widened as the shapes twisted and morphed into familiar faces. People from my past who I had lost, their features contorted in expressions of pain and sorrow. Join us, they crooned, voices a sickening blend of familiar affection and bitter despair. Each plea was a knife in my heart, pulling at my resolve, threatening to unravel me. I stumbled back, feeling the cold seep into my skin, growing more desperate as those faces drew closer. "No!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "You're not real. You're gone. You can't keep me here." The room trembled as the shadows enveloped my feet, writhing around my ankles like angry serpents. The walls whispered secrets I didn't want to hear, weaving a tale of failure and grief. "You can't escape the truth," they taunted, their words wrapping around me like chains. "You are bound to us." But a flicker of defiance surged inside me. "You have no power over me. This ends now," I cried, taking a deep breath as the warmth of the spirits began to pulse through my veins once more. I could feel their energy rallying around me, slowly pushing back against the encroaching darkness. But the shadows grew stubborn, twisting, contorting to form an immense figure in the middle of the room, eyes like burning coals drilling into my soul. "You did not learn your lesson," it growled, a low, rumbling voice that sounded both ancient and horrifyingly intimate. "You will face your fears again and again. I am your past, and I will devour your future." With every word, I felt the ground shake and the walls bowed in, cloaking me in a new layer of dread. Panic gripped my heart, but I spoke back with determination. "I will not let you trap me. I am not afraid." And yet inside, I could feel the flicker of fear taking root. I had faced this challenge, but would I be strong enough to stand my ground again? Struggling against that deep-seated terror, I envisioned the spirits, felt there, warmth, and gathered my strength. Fight with me. We will break this cycle." In response, their light flared brighter, pushing against the shadows with fierce resistance. The spectral figures of my past flickered, wavering in uncertainty. Even the monstrous figure in the center hesitated, its dark energy crackling like an impending storm about to burst. Seizing the moment, I poured my will into that light, willing it to grow larger, brighter, infusing every ounce of hope into the energy we shared. With a sudden roar, I pushed forward, confronting the towering darkness with everything I had. "You will not control me," I shouted. The dark figure reeled back, shrieking in fury, as the light engulfed it, illuminating every corner of the room, erasing the creeping shadows. I felt the pressure lifting, the weight of despair falling away, but then a heart-stopping moment I saw it. From the heart of the shadow, a sliver of darkness broke free, sharper than any blade, a tiny part of the entity that flitted past me like a shadow flitting through light. It slipped away into the depths, laughing triumphantly, a lingering reminder of the fear it carried within. "Let it go," the little girl urged, her voice echoing faintly as the darkness writhed and shrieked, but my heart raced with dread. "We need to stay together." "Stay together?" I echoed, confusion rippling through my mind. What if that dark piece comes back? I couldn't shake the feeling that escaping this room was only the beginning, a mere pause in a game that I didn't fully understand. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted once more. The air felt electric and alive with unwelcome potential. Dread wrapped around me like a cold shroud, sending prickles down my spine. I scanned the room, desperate for a way out. Each shadow seemed to breathe, pulsing with malice and promise, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. As I turned, I caught sight of a door at the far end of the room, half hidden in the recesses of shadow. It stood ajar, a flickering light spilling out like a promise, beckoning to me. "We have to go," I shouted, waving to the spirits to follow me. "Now!" They closed ranks around me, their light still dim but resolute, as we sprang towards that opening. But as we drew nearer, the laughter returned, even louder and haunting, echoing in an endless loop, as if mocking our imminent escape. "You think you can run?" it roared. "You will always be here. You can never escape." The door was closer now, the light inside flickering wildly, shadows swirling in a chaotic dance that made my heart race. I pushed onward, barely 6 feet away. Just as I reached for the doorknob, I felt a rush of wind behind me. It whipped through the room, gusting through my hair, carrying with it the echoes of voices from the shadows, swirling with haunting recollections. "You are nothing," they howled in unison, a chorus of despair that rattled through my bones. "You will never be free." With a deep breath, I grabbed the doorknob and twisted it. The door swung open, revealing a blinding light that cascaded into the darkness, momentarily disorienting me. Grabbing the spirits close, I stepped through that threshold without hesitation, letting that brightness engulf us, praying it would lead us far away from the monstrous darkness that swelled behind. But as I crossed into the light, there was a sudden thud, and the door slammed shut behind me, as if sealing my fate. I stumbled, blinking against the glare until my eyes adjusted, only to realize I was not out of danger yet. I found myself in a vast, shimmering void. The ground beneath me was made of mirrors reflecting endless, twisting shadows, creating an illusory landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls of the void were alive, shifting and morphing with a dark, pulsating energy. Ahead of me, I could see more shapes forming, gliding ominously in the distance, figures cloaked in shadow, their edges defined yet featureless, drifting closer as if sensing my presence. "Where are we?" I whispered, an unsettling awareness creeping into my mind. The spirits surrounding me dimmed further, their light flickering uncertainly. "What is happening?" "Stay close," the little boy urged, his voice small and shaky. I could feel the tremor in his energy, his warmth wavering against the encroaching chill. "They're watching us." I turned, scanning the expanse where the shapes still hovered, moving with an eerie grace that sent panic clenching at my heart. With every passing second, the weight of unseen eyes pressed firmly against my back, observing, judging, hungry for despair. "Look," one of the spirits gasped, pointing towards the center of the shimmering void. A massive portal began to take shape, swirling with dark light that pulsed rhythmically, drawing the figures towards it like moths to a flame. It was a vortex of shadow, a gaping mouth that promised to consume everything it touched. "What if that's another distraction?" I muttered, feeling the doubt creep back. "We can't let them pull us in," but it was too late. The figures moved in unison, gliding effortlessly towards the portal, a procession of the lost and forlorn. "You belong with us," they whispered, their voices smooth and silky, wrapping around me like a gentle caress. "You long for comfort. Come home." The temptation twisted in my gut like a serpent, wrapping around my mind. For one fleeting moment, I felt the urge to reach out, to surrender to the warmth that promised peace, to forget the fight I had just endured. It was terrifying, yet strangely inviting. "Don't listen," the little girl's voice broke through my haze, urgent and clear. "We're not done yet. Fight it." Shaking off the seductive whispers, I grasped tightly to the spirits. "We have to stay united. Together, we can resist." The vortex pulsed, a growling hunger that surged through the air like an insatiable beast, threatening to swallow us whole. I could feel it tugging at my core, an intangible force pulling me closer, urging me to step forward into the abyss. But I wouldn't yield. I gathered all of my strength, feeling the warmth of the spirits channel through me, coalescing into a shield against the nightmares looming at the edge. "We will not fall," I declared, standing firm against the tide of shadow. As the figures drew near, closer to the portal's edge, I focused, pouring out my defiance into the air. "We are not your lost souls. We are free." The shadows hesitated, a ripple of confusion passing through them as their forms flickered. I seized that moment, channeling every piece of light and strength to push against the tide. The spiraling darkness bent, and a blinding burst erupted from within me, illuminating the void like a supernova. The shadows writhed as I forced that light outward, flooding every inch of the space around me. "Together!" I shouted, feeling the spirits rallying once more, aligning with the growing force within me. "Together!" they echoed, their unified voices merging in an anthem, each spirit adding to the light and power that surged through the void. The vortex trembled, flickering, as if the shadows weren't just retreating, but beginning to unravel. But just as victory seemed within grasp, I felt a sudden lurch in the ground beneath me, and cracks exploded outward, sending shards of light and dark spiraling into the void. New fissures where darkness lingered, ready to spill forth once again. It was then I realized the battle wasn't just my own. It was a cycle, a tempest that would keep coming back if I didn't figure out how to end it once and for all. The figures drew closer to the portal, and I saw their eyes, hollow, desperate, broken. They were reflections of what I had faced, what I feared, but I would not allow them to claim me or the spirits beside me. "We stand in the light," I shouted again, gathering the light that had grown within us all, feeling the energy pulsating like a heartbeat, vibrant and unwavering. The shadows hesitated further, flickering dangerously, and I grasped that chance, focusing every part of my spirit towards that dark mass, willing it to submit to the radiance of hope that surged through us. We will be more than just our fears. We will be our stories, our strength. With one final push, I thrust the light forward like a spear into the heart of the vortex, feeling it explode on impact, forcing the shadows back in a brilliant wave. The darkness howled, retreating, shrieking in agony. As the darkness howled, retreating, shrieking in agony, as the brilliant light tore through the void, breaking the chains that held the shadows prisoner to their malevolence. The air crackled with energy as the light expanded, sending flickers of luminescence racing into every corner of the vast space. I could feel the spirits pulsating with renewed strength beside me, their warmth enveloping me like a protective cocoon against the chilling dread that tried to claw its way back. But the darkness was far from defeated. As the shadows weakened, they twisted into writhing forms, becoming even more distorted and furious. Faces became visible within the chaos. Angry, tormented souls that seemed to scream without sound. Their eyes, sunken and hollow, fixated on me with an insatiable hunger, as if my defiance stoked their rage. I could see the desperation in their expressions, a bitterness that froze my courage. "You think you can break free?" they hissed, their voices layered and echoing within the very fabric of the void. "You belong to us." The bitter pain in their words, mingled with anger, stirred something deep within me. I felt their fury wash over me, thick and suffocating, coaxing me to falter, to remember the past pains I had endured. "You could join us," one figure rasped, extending an arm toward me. It was a familiar face, someone I thought I had long lost, a friend consumed by sorrow and regret. "Why fight it? You can be with us, forever." With each hesitant step back, the ground beneath me shimmered like quicksand, threatening to swallow me whole. I knew it was a trap, a betrayal dressed in nostalgic warmth. "No!" I shouted, forcing my feet to stay rooted. The spirits around me flickered, their energy dimming as they sensed my wavering resolve. The shadows grew more aggressive as they lunged forward, merging together to create a monstrous entity that towered above us, looming with an ancient power that sent chills spiraling through my bones. "You cannot resist," it bellowed, voice deep and rumbling, resonating with the echoes of 1,000 lost souls. "You are just another whisper in the dark, another story to be consumed." Fear gripped my heart like a vice, clammy and constricting. I could hear the hollow laughter rising around me, and a creeping sense of doom washed over my thoughts. My breath quickened, panic clawing its way up my throat. In that darkness, in that all-consuming despair, I sensed my own past rising up, swirling around me like a tempest, dragging the buried pain to the surface. I could feel the familiar weight of regret and sorrow, a reminder of every moment I'd wished I could change, every time I had felt lost and helpless. The ghostly laughter echoed my fears, pulling me down into a pit of memories I had fought so hard to escape. "Join us," they sang, voices clawing at my sanity. "You cannot outrun what you truly are." Desperate to break free, I closed my eyes, blocking out their taunting visage. Biting back the tears that threatened to spill, I focused on the warm light within me, deep within my core. I had come so far. I could not let shadows steal my fight now. With a voice stronger than I even knew I had, I called out to the spirits, who flanked me with renewed determination. Together, I breathed, feeling an unbreakable bond swelling between us. "We are stronger together." As the words echoed around me, the monstrous darkness convulsed, unsteady for just a moment. I could feel the ground beneath my feet tremble, the light emanating from my core intertwining with that of the spirits. "Embrace your truth," I shouted, summoning every ounce of courage and hope, reminding myself why I had to stand. "We won't become your prey." With that declaration, the light intensified, bursting forth like a supernova, brilliant and pure against the ravenous darkness. The shadows shrieked, their haunting cries mingling with the energy swirling around us. And for the first time, I felt a surge of triumph deep within. The darkness began to crack, fracturing like black glass in the light of day. A sellout thrumming in the air announced its collapse as fissures sliced through the monstrous form. Each crack released a cacophony of anguished wails, but I couldn't let their torment seep into my heart. Instead, I mirrored their agony and fear with my strength, letting them know that their time was up. As I stood firm, surrounded by my faithful spirits, I began to walk forward, pushing through the waves of dark energy crashing against me. The void trembled underfoot, the very fabric of it threatening to unravel. But I kept my gaze fixed on the swirling portal that lingered in the distance. Behind me, the symphony of shadow howled, their cries echoing in the gloom, but I refused to be swayed. Then something shifted, a flicker in my periphery caught my attention. A shadow broke away from the chaos, slipping silently across the void towards the portal, moving with unnatural speed. Panic surged through me as I recognized its form, the very same dark shard that had escaped the chamber earlier. There was no way it was free. It was hunting for something. "Don't let it escape!" I yelled, the urgency sharp in my throat. The spirits responded, racing alongside me as we dashed toward the portal. Just as we neared, the shadow darted, shrinking to fit through the narrowing gap. I extended a hand, but it slipped through, vanishing on the other side like smoke dissipating in the wind. As I stumbled to a stop, dread pooled in my stomach, palpable and heavy. The remaining shadows drew close, a collective mass swirling with twisted fury, their forms warping in on each other as they hesitated. They sensed the absence of their comrade, fear blooming in their depths, mirroring the chaos that still spiraled through the void. "We have to close it," I urged, my heart thudding violently against my ribcage. "Before it comes back with more." The spirits gathered around me, their light shining more fiercely than ever. I felt the energy between us crackle with fervor and determination. "Together!" I exclaimed, my voice ringing out against the dark energy swirling around us. "We can shut it down, all of us." As we pressed forward, the light within us formed a radiant barrier, pushing against the chaotic shadows. The air felt electric, and a heat surged through me as I concentrated, drawing on every ounce of courage and strength. With unison harmony, we channeled our will, the light flaring brightly, and I could feel the resonance of our spirits intertwining, evolving into something more, something powerful, like a beacon of hope amidst a vast, consuming dark. "Now!" I shouted, releasing it like a wave crashing upon the shore. The pulse of energy collided with the portal, radiating outward, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it ripple and shimmer, flickering between the gaps of reality. The darkness writhed in response, angry and desperate. It surged forward, clawing to reclaim what it had lost, and I feared it would break through. But we pressed harder, adding our voices to the moment. "Together, together, together," we chanted, our voices blending in an enchanting harmony that resonated throughout the void. The shadows recoiled, flickering in place as the ground trembled violently beneath us. We held firm, a bastion against the dark. The barrier expanded, enveloping the portal until it pulsed like a heartbeat, each thump sending shockwaves through the darkness. Just then, in a final surge, the shadows collided with our brilliance, their last frantic attempts to reclaim lost power erupting in a chaotic clash, filling the air with sharp echoes of fury and despair. Yet as the light burst forth, it consumed the shadows, rapidly closing on the portal, forcing them back from the edge of oblivion. I could feel the spirits rallying hard. They knew the stakes, knew how vital it was to secure our victory. And with one final surge of energy, we thrust the darkness back, sealing the portal with a shattering explosion of light. The sound was deafening. A heartbeat echoed in a surreal blend of silence and tumult, and I felt a blinding flash sweep over us, reflecting shards of shattered shadow raining down like ash from above. My heart raced as the light illuminated the once twisted darkness, erasing it entirely like it had never existed. Still trembling, I gazed around, the void no longer feeling oppressive, but vibrant and alive, bathed in a soft glow that enveloped us in its warmth. I could see the spirits beside me, their forms bright and invigorated, shimmering wildly as the remnants of darkness evaporated around us. But just as relief washed over me, I noticed something unsettling, a flicker of shadow darting just beyond my vision, lingering on the edges of the doorway we had closed. I felt it tightening in my chest, a creeping sensation of dread returning. "Is it over?" I murmured, my breath hitching slightly. The spirits exchanged concerned glances, sharing my unease. I could see it now, a faint, swirling shadow lingering like a dark stain, pulsating with ominous promise. What if it finds a way to break through again? As those thoughts took root, I heard the shadows once more, whispering sweetly through the chaos. You cannot escape the cycle, they sang, eerie and plaintive. You will return to us? The very air vibrated with their words, trickling chill up my spine. No, I said, fear clawing at my resolve. No! I shook my head, dispelling the doubt, clenching my fists with newfound determination. We will find a way to end this. But as I faced the shadow lingering at the edges of reality, uncertainty gnawed at my insides. It was a mere wisp of darkness, yet it seemed to thrive upon my fear, drawing strength from my uncertainty, and I knew it would not make this easy. Gathering my courage, I took a step forward, feeling the warmth of the spirits beside me guiding my heart. We'll face this together. We will not let it consume us. I called, my voice unwavering. The spirits resonated with my conviction, their lights flaring brighter, creating a protective barrier around me. The shadow flickered, hesitation creeping into its edges. I stood firm, heart pounding as its essence flickered like the last embers of a dying fire. You will not win, I declared, echoing the strength of my voice through the once silenced void. This ends now. Letting the light swell within me, I directed the energy into one final push, forcing the warmth of my spirit toward the lingering darkness. Back to where you belong, I shouted, the chant growing louder, stronger. In that heartbeat, I felt a resonating power, an understanding that this wasn't just a battle for my safety, but for every soul lost to despair. With the spirits joining in, we surged forward together. The shadows screeched, a chorus of twisted voices rising in terror, as I propelled the soaring light towards the darkness, shattering what was left of their hold. As our light collided with the shadow, a brilliant explosion erupted, casting vibrancy into the corners of the void. The dark whispers faded, retreating as the darkness split apart and collapsed in on itself. I felt the tremor of victory beneath me, yet dread still stirred in my chest. Although the shadow dissolved beneath our collective force, I knew I had to stand on guard. Darkness always lingers, lurking in the corners of existence, waiting for a crack to break through again. I would have to remain vigilant, aware that my fight with the darkness wasn't truly finished. Looking at the spirits surrounding me, I found a sense of reassurance in their vibrant glow. Together we could face whatever threat loomed on the horizon, whatever shadow dared to emerge again. And as the remnants of darkness dissipated, I focused on the light, feeling its warmth wash over me as I took a breath. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just a figure against the void. I was a beacon amidst the shadows, a survivor rising from the depths of despair. And with each passing heartbeat, I was ready to reclaim my story, ready to confront the phantoms that haunted my past and stand strong before the unknown battles that awaited. With the shadows retreating into obscurity and the light resonating with newfound purpose, I took one last breath of fresh air, preparing to step forward into the uncharted territory beyond the void, knowing that the restless night was far from over. Ready to reclaim my story, and with each passing heartbeat, I was aware that the aftershocks of the battle still lingered in the air, an unsettling tension that coiled around me like a thick fog. I took a tentative step forward, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribcage, echoing in the silence that stretched around me. The luminous energy from the spirits pulsed beside me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. There was a lingering shadow near the edges of my vision, a darkness that seemed determined to cling to the remnants of the battle, a reminder that the threat wasn't gone for good. As I moved deeper into the void, I glanced back at the portal, now sealed shut, but the image burned into my mind, dark tendrils creeping around the edges, grasping desperately as if the shadows were clawing to reclaim a lost path. I shivered, feeling the chill of fear creeping back into my mind, whispering cruel thoughts that I tried to shake away. "It's over," I said softly, hoping to convince myself more than anything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. Something was still waiting. That feeling only intensified as I ventured forward, the light dimming slightly as I moved away from the barrier we had created. The spirits fluttered around me, their flickering forms casting strange shadows that danced along the ground. Each flicker seemed to take on a life of its own, twisting and curling into grotesque shapes that made my skin crawl. I couldn't trust what lay ahead. The atmosphere felt thick, suffocating, as if the air itself was charged with static electricity. I could hear faint murmurs, echoes of despair that hung on the breeze. I strained to decipher the words, but they slipped away like smoke, teasing my mind, sending a chill racing down my spine. Then came a slow, deliberate movement at the edge of my awareness. I halted, squinting into the dimness. A figure emerged, gliding through the shadows with an eerie grace. Its features were obscured by a dark cloak, moving like liquid night, merging seamlessly with the darkness around it. I held my breath, battling the instinct to turn and run, but something held me in place, a mixture of fear and curiosity. As the entity drew closer, I felt a cold wave wash over me, an aura of dread that seeped into my bones. The spirits beside me recoiled, their lights flickering uncertainly, and I sensed their trepidation, a shared anxiety that pulsed in the air like a humming chord. It whispered my name, soft and mocking, the sound wrapping around my consciousness like a vine, squeezing tighter with every breath. "Join us," it crooned again, and I felt a shudder ripple through my body. It wasn't just a voice. It was an echo of my own fears, my darkest thoughts, reflecting back at me through that hideous smile that crept across its shadowed face. "You don't belong in the light. Come forth. Embrace what you truly are." I swallowed hard, a mix of alarm and recognition making me falter. The words rang too close to home, striking a chord deep within me. I could see myself in that creature, the same deep-rooted doubts, the gnawing anxiety that whispered I would never truly escape the darkness. "No," I demanded, shaking my head, forcing the thoughts back where they belonged. "I refuse." But the cloaked figure only laughed, an unsettling, spine-chilling sound that echoed through the void. "Refusal is futile," it said, voice dripping with malevolence. "You think you can fight it? You think this fight means anything?" I felt the ground shift under me, and I stumbled slightly, sensing the power of its persuasion. Shadows slid closer, curling around my feet like serpent tails, binding and constricting. The laughter grew louder, resonating through the void, coaxing out hidden fears buried within my mind. "You will join the others," it mocked, and suddenly, images flashed before me. Faces twisted in despair, their silent screams echoing in the dark. Friends lost to despair, moments of weakness clawing at my memories, all swirling together in a nightmarish haze. "No!" I cried, forcing myself to take a step back, my breath coming faster. "This ends here," I called, feeling my voice waver, but I pressed on. "Neither you nor anyone else can take me back to that place." With that, a surge of defiance swelled within me, and I reached for the light that surged at my center. I could feel the spirits rallying around me, their energy merging with my own, igniting a warm glow that bounced back against the darkness. The shadowy figure recoiled, momentarily stunned, its laughter cut off when confronted with the intensity of our unity. I pressed forward, the light growing brighter, forcing back the tendrils of dark that attempted to sway me. "You don't own me. I am not just another lost soul to be consumed," I declared, voice rising as I moved closer to my lurking foe. "I am not afraid." With that final proclamation, I hurled the glowing energy towards the figure, feeling the warmth radiate from my core, a burst of luminescence that lit up the void around us. The shadows screamed, soundless, pitiful wails that twisted in desperation. The figure writhed, the cloak of darkness collapsing around it, blackened fingers reaching for something, anything to cling to. but there was nothing left. Then, as the radiant light collided with the figure, a bright flash enveloped everything. The shadows evaporated like mist, swirling away into the ether. The laughter ceased, replaced by the haunting silence of a void emptied. But the whisper remained, echoing in the stillness. "You cannot escape forever. We will find a way back." I reeled back from the light, feeling momentarily disoriented, the remnants of fear still swirling like autumn leaves in a breeze. "What was that?" I muttered, dread creeping back. What if the darkness isn't really gone? The spirits flickered nervously beside me, and I could feel their unease seeping into me, a thread of worry weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. Pushing myself to breathe, I took a step back, my senses sharpened as I scanned the space around me. The air felt charged, thick with the remnants of every whisper and every sigh, alive with an unsettling tension that made my skin crawl. Each corner of the void, every shadow cast against the glowing light, felt alive, pulsing with a sentience that made the back of my neck prickle. As I advanced, the whispers returned, familiar and disembodied voices, weaving through the air like a sinister melody. They called my name, seductive and conspiratorial, eager to ensnare me once again. "Come back. You can't resist. We know your pain." The more they beckoned, the more the shadows twisted, coiling across the floor like sinuous serpents, possessing their own life force, drawing closer and closer. I clutched my hands in fists, trying to block out the sound, but the words burrowed deep into my mind, tugging at every insecurity. "You're weak. You're lost. You'll never escape." They entwined like poisonous vines, constricting around my thoughts. "Open your mind. Let us in." The flickering lights from the spirits flickered again, uncertain but still resolute. "We are with you," one of them whispered, barely above a breath, hanging on my shoulder like a lullaby. "Don't give in." But doubt gnawed at my heart as I turned, facing the encroaching shadows that crept into my periphery. I took a step back, colliding with something solid. It felt alive, a presence that sent shockwaves of fear surging through me. The shadows, having coalesced around me once again, were tightening their grip, encasing me in an icy hold as they pushed closer, hungry for despair. "My name is now a part of you," they hissed. Temptations dripped from their voices, curling around the corners of my mind like sticky honey. "You wanted to escape, but this darkness is your purpose." "No!" I shouted, a burst of adrenaline surging through my veins. I could feel the warm glow of the spirits, their energy radiating like a shield around me, but I was teetering on the edge. The suffocating weight of their words threatened to pull me down into a chasm of regret and despair. As the looming shadows converged, drawing closer, I reached deep inside myself, searching for that familiar light. The warmth flickered in response, igniting a fire that pushed against the crushing dark. "This is not my purpose," I yelled defiantly, summoning the energy of my spirit companions, feeling their flickers harmonizing with my own battle cry. In that moment, I felt the boundaries of the void begin to shift. The darkness pulled back ever so slightly, just enough for a shimmering opening to break through. The light surged, encompassing me with a vivid luminescence, banishing the encroaching shadows, momentarily pushing them back from the edges of my being. "Stand strong," the spirits echoed, their collective energy swirling around me, healing the wounds of fear that threatened to consume me. I pressed forward, determined to reclaim my light, my story. Together, we will not falter. But as I pushed through the churning darkness, I sensed a flicker of movement, a dark figure lurking just beyond the reach of light. My heart raced anew as I tried to focus, squinting into the darkness beyond. I could feel its presence, a shadow waiting with bated breath as if contemplating its next move, watching me with intensity that sent my heart plummeting. "What else is in this darkness?" I whispered to myself, though I already knew the answer. The air around me grew thick, suffocating almost. It wasn't just the dampness of the place. It felt wrong, like something was closing in, something ancient and heavy. My feet moved slowly, as if my body was fighting me, urging me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to keep going. The curiosity, the need to understand what was happening, why everything around me felt like it was holding its breath, was stronger than the fear creeping up my spine. Suddenly, a sharp scrape echoed from somewhere deep in the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was as if something had dragged its fingers along the stone walls, scraping away at the very fabric of the silence. I tried to call out, but my voice didn't come. The words lodged in my throat, choked by the oppressive air. My hands, trembling now, reached for the flashlight in my pocket, but as soon as I touched the cold metal, it slipped from my grasp. The sound of it clattering to the ground was loud enough to make me jump. I bent down quickly to retrieve it, but as I did, the distinct sound of breathing filled the space around me. It wasn't my own. This was slower, heavier, more labored. The kind of breath that wasn't supposed to belong to anything human. I stood up straight, my fingers trembling as they fumbled for the flashlight once more. My body was screaming at me to run, but my feet refused to move. I could feel the presence drawing closer, the weight of it pressing against my chest, suffocating me with every passing second. Then I saw it, the flash of pale skin, a hand, long fingers reaching out from the shadows, the nails jagged and cracked. It wasn't just a hand. It was wrong. The skin was stretched too tight, as though it had been pulled from beneath the earth, warped and malformed. The fingers twitched, almost like it was testing the air, sensing me. I staggered back, heart hammering in my chest, but the moment I moved, the hand jerked toward me, slamming against the stone wall with a force that shook the ground beneath my feet. I stumbled, nearly falling, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The hand stayed there, pressed against the stone, its fingers curling into a fist with a sickening crack. I couldn't look away. I shouldn't have looked away. Slowly, I turned my gaze upward, where I expected to see the face of whatever lurked in the darkness. But there was nothing, just a long stretch of shadow. No eyes, no form, just nothing. Then came the voice. It wasn't a whisper, but a low, guttural hum, vibrating through the air and settling deep inside my bones. "Come closer," it urged, the words thick and heavy like syrup, slow and deliberate. I could barely breathe, my pulse throbbing in my ears. It was almost like the voice was inside me now, reaching into my mind, tugging on my thoughts, and making my limbs feel like they were filled with cement. "Come closer," it repeated, the sound wrapping around my mind, pulling me forward like a moth drawn to a flame. I wanted to fight it. I tried to fight it, but my feet betrayed me. They began to move against my will, dragging me forward, each step slower than the last. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The figure. It wasn't just one anymore. There were more. A sea of them, emerging from the shadows, their features indistinct, shifting like smoke. Their bodies were almost translucent, as if they were made from the darkness itself. Their eyes, if they had eyes, burned with an unnatural, sickly light. The deeper I stared, the more their forms seemed to pulse, like they were alive and breathing in ways no human body should. One of them reached out a hand toward me, fingers curling slowly, its face a face of shifting, changing shapes. One moment it was human, the next a mass of teeth and eyes, its mouth opening impossibly wide in a silent scream. I tried to look away, but my body refused to listen. I was paralyzed, and then it spoke. "No one leaves." The words echoed in my mind, louder now, resonating through my skull. I felt them pressing on my thoughts, pushing, demanding that I understand. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The air around me thickened, the temperature dropping to an almost unbearable chill. And then the shadows began to shift. The darkness wasn't just still anymore. It began to move with purpose, shifting and swaying like it had a mind of its own. It was alive. I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body refused to obey. "You are mine now," the voice hummed again, this time directly in my ear. I felt something cold against the back of my neck, something wet. Slowly, it began to crawl down like fingers or a tongue. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that it was cold, so cold, and it was wrapping itself around me, squeezing tighter with every second, every breath. And then I felt it, the claw, the sharp, jagged pain shot through my chest. My breath hitched in a gasp, the world going blurry as I clutched at the spot where it had struck. I looked down, seeing nothing, nothing but the blackness that seemed to be pouring out of me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My hands were shaking violently, trying to stop the blackness that had begun to spread from the wound, as though it were alive, feeding, growing within me. The shadows pressed in closer now, their forms undulating, shifting like they were feeding off my fear. Their hands reached out, fingers touching my skin, seeping through me, as if they were trying to get inside. I felt the cold again, the same freezing sensation crawling along my spine. I twisted, my eyes scanning the room, desperately trying to focus, but it was too late. The figures were all around me now, pressing in from every side, whispering words I couldn't understand. All I could do was wait. I could feel them closing in, their cold, damp presence pressing against me, surrounding me in every direction. The whispering grew louder, like 1,000 voices murmuring all at once, overlapping, their words too jumbled to make sense of. But somehow, they felt like they were speaking directly to me. "Come with us?" I shook my head, trying to block them out. I had to focus. I had to move. But the weight of the air, the suffocating pressure that seemed to rise with each passing second, made it impossible to think straight. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling beneath me. The darkness around me seemed to shift, almost as if it had a life of its own. It moved in patterns and shapes, like it was alive, like it was studying me, watching me. The clawing sensation on my skin deepened, as if invisible fingers were scratching at my flesh, leaving behind a cold, seeping burn. I tried to tear away, but my body was sluggish, my muscles frozen, weighed down by the dark forces closing in. And then I heard it, a crack, a sudden, sharp sound like bones snapping under pressure. I turned, the flashlight shaking in my hands, and saw it. A figure, tall, almost too tall, its limbs elongated and twisted in unnatural ways. The skin was stretched too tight, taut against its bones, as though it had been pulled and distorted for far too long. Its face. There were no features, just empty sockets where eyes should have been, and a wide, thin mouth that seemed to stretch impossibly far across its face. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up. I was choking on the air, on the terror that gripped me like an iron vice. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching, its mouth opening and closing in a slow, rhythmic pattern, as though it was savoring my fear, enjoying the terror that was leaking out of me. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The words weren't just spoken aloud. They echoed in my mind, reverberating in the deepest corners of my skull. The voice wasn't human. Its tone was low, guttural, almost like it was being dragged from the depths of something ancient, something hungry. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. It was as if its gaze was paralyzing me, its presence overwhelming, consuming every ounce of my will. The others, those figures, shifted, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows. There was something wrong with their movement. They didn't walk. They slithered in and out of existence, like they were made from the very darkness itself. Every time I tried to focus on one of them, it would shift, its body distorting, bending at impossible angles, until it was somewhere else entirely. Then a loud thump. My heart skipped a beat as something massive, something far too large for this cramped space, banged against the wall behind me. I turned, but saw nothing. The air seemed to hum with a dark energy, as if something was stirring beneath the ground, something ancient, something evil that had been waiting for far too long. The walls trembled again. This time, the thumping wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like a slow, deliberate march of something that was moving toward me, drawn to me. I turned, desperate, feeling the cold prickle at my skin, hearing the soft scraping sound again, like claws dragging against stone. My fingers were numb, my mind racing, but there was no escape. "You are ours now." The words slid through my mind, like oil, thick and dark, wrapping around my thoughts, choking them. I looked around in panic. The shadows, they were moving, gathering in the corners of the room. The shapes of the figures melted into the walls, fusing with the darkness, like they were part of it. Their forms blurred, shifting like liquid before snapping back into focus. Then I saw it, a shape too large, too unnatural to be anything real. It was coming, a dark mass, crawling along the floor, writhing, twisting as it grew. It was like a wave of pure shadow, rolling toward me, devouring the light. My heart raced, but my legs wouldn't move. I was stuck, trapped in this nightmare, unable to escape the pull of the abyss. Suddenly, the mass surged forward. It crashed into me with a force that nearly knocked the breath from my body. I was thrown backward, my head slamming against the cold stone floor. Pain exploded in my skull, but it was nothing compared to the terror that gripped me. I opened my eyes, blood rushing in my ears, and saw nothing, just an endless, swirling mass of shadow pressing down on me, the suffocating weight of it crushing me. My arms flailed uselessly, my fingers scraping against the stone, trying to find purchase, trying to pull myself out of its grip. But the shadows were everywhere. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't feel anything but the cold, the crushing darkness that was slowly, steadily swallowing me whole. And then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many. "Stay. Forever. With us." The whispers wrapped around me, louder now, deafening, pulling me under. I felt my consciousness slipping, my thoughts fading, like I was being dragged into the deepest part of the ocean, where the light couldn't reach. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the sound of my own breath, gasping, choking like I was drowning. And then silence. The silence, it was suffocating. For what felt like an eternity, I drifted, unable to move, unable to breathe, lost in a void. It was as if time had stopped, as if I was suspended between two worlds, one that was dark and cold, and another that felt too far away to reach. My chest burned from the lack of air, but I couldn't feel my body, couldn't feel anything except the overwhelming pressure that crushed me. I tried to open my eyes, but they wouldn't move. My eyelids felt like they were glued shut, as if something was holding them closed from the outside. I was trapped in a cage of my own mind, unable to escape, and the more I struggled, the more I felt the darkness tugging at me, pulling me deeper. Suddenly, a light flickered, small at first, barely visible through the blackness. I blinked, my eyes fighting to open, and there it was again, a soft glow, far in the distance. I tried to reach for it, but my arms felt like they were made of lead, heavy and unresponsive. The more I focused on the light, the more it seemed to recede, like it was pulling away from me. Then I heard it, a sound soft at first, like something dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. It was the unmistakable sound of something moving, its steps too slow, too careful, as if it didn't want to be noticed. I forced my eyes open with every ounce of strength I could muster, and when I did, the darkness around me shifted. I saw them, figures standing just beyond the edge of the light. Their faces were blurred, features indistinct, but their eyes were clear. They were watching me. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move. I tried to call out, but there was no sound, just that cold, suffocating silence. One of the figures stepped forward, its shape becoming clearer, more defined. The light from above revealed enough for me to see it. A figure tall and thin, with long limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending at odd angles. Its face, there was something wrong with it. It was wrong in ways I couldn't describe. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and the features seemed to shift, melting into each other. One moment it had eyes, the next the sockets were hollow. Its mouth, when it opened, stretched too wide, too impossibly far. I felt my pulse quicken, my heart hammering in my chest, as its gaze locked onto me. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was familiar but wrong. It was as if the words were being dragged out of the thing's mouth, wet and distorted, with a strange echo that made my teeth ache. I felt the darkness shift again. It wasn't just around me anymore, it was inside of me like it had crawled under my skin, taking root. My body trembled, my legs shaking beneath me, yet I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the weight of the thing's stare. Then another figure stepped forward, and then another. They were coming closer, slowly, deliberately. Each one was different, shifting, changing, but they all shared one thing in common, their eyes. The eyes were filled with a hunger, a cold, ravenous emptiness that made my blood run cold. I felt it again, the pull. Something deep inside me, something primal, told me to run, to get away from them, but I couldn't move. My body was no longer mine. It was like I was stuck in a nightmare, unable to wake up. And then, the figure in front of me smiled. It wasn't a smile. It was a twisted, grotesque mockery of one. Its lips curled back too far, too wide, until its entire face seemed to stretch open, revealing rows upon rows of sharp, jagged teeth, gleaming in the faint light. The eyes, those eyes, burned with a malevolent light, and I could feel them piercing me, cutting into my very soul. "You're not going anywhere." The voice was louder now, closer, crawling up my spine. It wasn't just the figure speaking. It was all of them, their voices melding together into one, overlapping, blending until I couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. My chest felt tight, as though I couldn't get enough air, and the darkness around me pressed harder, like it was squeezing the life out of me. The ground beneath me shifted, suddenly giving way as though the earth itself was bending, cracking, breaking apart. I fell. No, I was falling, but it wasn't into anything. There was no ground beneath me, no floor, just an endless void. I flailed, reaching out for anything to stop the fall, but there was nothing. The fall felt like it lasted forever, and yet in the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't real. It wasn't really happening. It couldn't be. But I felt the wind rushing past me, felt the cold, the panic, the fear as I tumbled deeper into the abyss. The figures above me, those creatures were still watching, still waiting. And then, with a sudden jolt, I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Something was holding me down, pinning me to the ground. My body was immobile, my muscles frozen, my chest locked tight in place. The darkness wrapped around me, thicker now, almost liquid, seeping into my mouth, my nose, my ears, filling every inch of me. I could feel it, them, crawling under my skin, their cold fingers slipping into my veins, spreading through my body like poison. "We are inside you now," the voice whispered in my ear, smooth, liquid, like it was slithering through my thoughts. "You can't leave." I tried to scream. I tried to break free. But I couldn't. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the darkness lifted. I gasped, as the weight was gone, but it wasn't over. I wasn't safe. I could still hear them, still feel them, watching me from just beyond the edge of my perception. The room was silent again, but I knew better. The silence was false. They were still here, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting for me to make a mistake. Something was following me, and it was getting closer. I could feel it, the presence. It wasn't just in the shadows now. It was inside me. I tried to move, tried to make my legs work, but they felt like they were stuck in concrete, heavy and slow. My feet shuffled against the ground as if they were dragging through thick mud, and every step was a struggle, like something was holding me back, pulling at my soul, dragging me deeper into the dark. The air around me grew colder, the kind of cold that cuts through you to your bones, and the deeper I walked, the more I felt it pressing against me, squeezing the air out of my lungs, making it harder to breathe. My breath came in short gasps, each exhale a cloud of mist that hung in the air before vanishing into the dark. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, but I could feel it, watching me. It was too quiet, too still. The silence felt wrong. The further I went, the more the walls around me seemed to close in. The ceiling above my head was low, and the floor beneath me was uneven, covered with slick patches of moss. I reached out to steady myself against the wall, but my fingers brushed against something wet and cold. It wasn't water. It felt alive. The texture shifted under my touch, like something was breathing. I pulled my hand away quickly, feeling a sudden wave of panic rush through me. What was that? Was it just my imagination? No. Something was in the walls. Something hungry. Suddenly, a sound echoed behind me. A faint scraping, like nails dragging across stone. I froze. It's getting closer. The sound grew louder, more distinct. The closer it got, the more I could feel it reverberating in my chest, like it was shaking the ground itself. Then click, a soft noise like something unlocking. The air shifted, and for a split second, I could swear I heard breathing. Heavy, labored breaths like someone or something was trying to catch its breath. Just behind me, I turned quickly, heart pounding in my chest. But again, nothing. Only darkness. But that was the thing. It wasn't the absence of light that terrified me. It was the something lurking in it, waiting, moving. I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes darting nervously around the narrow corridor. Every shadow seemed to flicker with a life of its own, stretching and shrinking with the rhythm of my breath. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, knowing something was following me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I could almost feel the pressure of its stare on me, piercing through the darkness. The corridor opened into a larger room, but the moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped even more. It felt like I had stepped into a freezer, my breath hanging in the air in thick clouds. The walls in here were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. I could hear it again, the breathing, louder now, deeper, as though something was waiting, watching. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest, but my feet wouldn't listen. I needed to get out, but the sound grew louder, closer. I could hear the shuffle of feet now, slow and deliberate, and something else, something dragging along the ground. I spun around, trying to find the source, but the room was empty. Just shadows, just symbols on the walls. And then a voice, a whisper, from the corner of the room, so soft at first that I thought I imagined it. "Don't run." The words were so quiet, so thick, like they came from somewhere deep inside me. I froze. The voice wasn't just in my ears, it was inside my mind. It reverberated through my skull, crawling into my thoughts. "You can't escape." It was closer now. The voice was all around me, surrounding me, wrapping around my thoughts like tendrils of smoke. "We are here." And then I saw it, a shape, a shadow. It was just at the edge of my vision at first, something standing in the corner, hunched low, its shape distorted, the outlines of its body flickering in and out of focus. As I stared, it seemed to shift, like it was trying to solidify, to become something real, something dangerous. It didn't move, but I could feel it, watching me. And then I heard it again, the dragging sound. It was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the shadows. Suddenly, the shape lunged forward. I barely had time to react as I was pulled, yanked backward by something invisible. My body slammed against the cold stone wall, knocking the wind out of me. My breath came in desperate gasps as I scrambled to stand, but I couldn't get my bearings. The figure was now in front of me, too close. Its face was nothing, just a blank, featureless mask of shadow. But I could feel its eyes. No, its gaze, pressing into me like it was pulling apart my thoughts, twisting them into something dark, something wrong. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating. My chest burned, and my heart felt like it was going to burst. I reached for the walls, for anything to hold on to, but the stone was slick with some kind of substance. A dark, oily liquid that seemed to shift beneath my touch, sliding through my fingers. "You can't leave." The voice was back. Closer now, more insistent. It was inside me. The floor beneath me groaned, and suddenly I felt it, a vibration, like something was moving beneath the earth. The walls trembled, and the room around me seemed to shift, bending at strange angles. The air was thick with something. I turned, searching for an exit, but the way out was gone. I was trapped. And then I heard it, the whisper. "Closer now. It's time." And everything collapsed. The darkness swallowed me whole. I didn't know if I was falling or if the world was collapsing around me. One moment, the room was there, the shadows pressing in, and the next, everything vanished. The ground was gone, the walls gone, the ceiling gone. The very fabric of this place was slipping through my fingers like sand. It was as if the air itself was disintegrating, and I was being sucked into a black hole, pulled into the nothingness. But then I felt it something cold, slick. It wrapped around my body, pulling me downward, and I gasped as my back hit something hard. A floor? Or maybe just another layer of shadow. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs felt as though they were being pinned down by invisible weights. I could still hear the whispering, now louder, more frantic, as if it was feeding on my fear, getting stronger with each second. "You can't run." The voice hissed through my mind like a snake, its words curling and twisting inside my skull. It was no longer just in the air around me. It was in me, part of me. I could feel it in my blood, like it was crawling under my skin, burrowing into my thoughts. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, choked, as though something was lodged there, keeping me from breathing properly. I couldn't see, couldn't move, could barely even feel the ground beneath me. But I could hear it, the dragging sound. It was closer now, right beside me, as if something was moving, scraping against the very fabric of the world. The noise was so close I could feel it vibrating through my bones. I tried to pull my arms free, but they wouldn't budge. It was like I was caught in thick, sticky tar. The more I struggled, the more it seemed to bind me, tightening around me like ropes. Then, from the darkness, I saw it. Something moving, something crawling toward me. I couldn't make out its shape at first. It was just a blur, like a shadow, stretching and contorting, but as it drew nearer, I could see it clearer. A figure. Tall, thin, twisted. Its limbs were too long, too unnatural, bending in ways they shouldn't. The skin was gray, stretched tight across its bones, and its face, God, its face was like a mask, too still, too empty. The eyes were wide open, but there was nothing behind them. Nothing but blackness, a void that seemed to suck in all the light. I wanted to scream. I needed to scream, but I couldn't. It was as if my voice had been stolen, buried somewhere deep inside, where it couldn't reach me. And then I felt it, the cold, the presence of it, wrapping around me like ice, freezing my thoughts, freezing everything. I could feel its breath on my face, cold and damp, as it hovered just above me. I could smell it too, a sour, rotten odor that burned in my nostrils, making my stomach twist. The figure leaned in closer, its face so close to mine that I could feel the heat from its body. It smelled of decay, of something ancient, like it had been waiting here for an eternity. "You're ours now." The words slipped into my mind, crawling through my thoughts, sinking into the very marrow of my bones. The thing's mouth didn't move, but I heard it inside my head, in my own voice, as if it were speaking through me. I tried to push it away, tried to will myself out of this nightmare, but it was too late. It was everywhere now. The walls, the ground, the very air around me was filled with it. The shadows were no longer just shadows. They were alive. They moved, slithered, twisted like they had a mind of their own. They were pressing in on me from all sides, their tendrils wrapping around my arms, my legs, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I couldn't see, couldn't move, but I could feel it, all of it, crawling beneath my skin. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, when I thought I would be consumed by the darkness, something shifted. A crack. A sharp, sudden sound like something breaking. The shadows paused. For just a moment, everything stilled. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The room, if it could still be called that, felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A light. Faint. Flickering. I wanted to reach for it. I needed to reach for it. But there was no time. The figure in front of me, that thing, jerked back. I saw its eyes widen, its form shuddering, like it was trying to tear itself apart. It screeched, a horrible, guttural sound that rattled my bones, echoing through the space. reverberating through my very skull. The light grew brighter, stronger. I reached out again, my fingers trembling, desperate. My hand brushed something soft, flesh, warmth. I whipped my head around. There was someone behind me, a person, or something that looked like a person. It was tall, too tall, standing just out of reach. Its skin was pale, nearly translucent, and its eyes were like mine, wide open, terrified, filled with an understanding I couldn't comprehend. It spoke, but its voice didn't sound like words. It was a hum, a vibration, like it was reaching into me without ever touching me. Hurry. Don't look back. I didn't understand, but I didn't care. I didn't look back. I just ran. The light was real now. I could feel it shining through the darkness, and I ran straight into it, every step echoing in the emptiness. Behind me, I heard it again, the dragging sound. Closer now, faster. The thing was coming for me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. And then I saw it. An exit. A door. Wide open, waiting for me. I was so close. So close. But then something grabbed me. It wasn't cold. It wasn't the shadows. It was warm, human. The last thing I saw before everything went black was a face. Familiar. Mine. The world snapped back into focus, but it wasn't the same. My head throbbed, and my body felt like it was being pulled in every direction at once. For a moment, I couldn't tell where I was. I was lying on something cold, damp. The air felt thick, heavy, but it didn't smell like the suffocating darkness I'd just escaped. No, this was different, like earth, like wet stone and dust. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what had happened. The face, the familiar face, was still fresh in my mind, its wide, hollow eyes staring at me as everything went dark. I hadn't been alone, had I? I pushed myself up, feeling the ground beneath me. My fingers scraped against something rough like jagged stone, but the moment I tried to stand, I felt it again, a sharp, suffocating weight. It was as though the air had become thick, pressing down on me, forcing me back to the ground. I gasped, my breath coming out in ragged, shallow breaths. Where was I? The room, it was small, almost claustrophobic. The walls were close, too close. They pressed in on me, making it hard to think, to breathe. The only light came from an overhead source, a single flickering bulb that hummed with a steady, mechanical buzz. The light wasn't enough. It barely illuminated the space around me, and I could see shadows shifting in the corners, creeping along the walls, too fast, too unnatural. The air felt wrong, like something was moving within it, brushing against my skin. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards beneath me felt like a loud warning, a signal that something was waiting just behind me. I turned slowly, my heart thudding so loudly in my chest it felt like it might tear through my ribcage. Nothing. I was alone, but the shadows didn't feel empty. They were alive, pulsing with something I couldn't explain, something hungry. I forced myself to stand, my knees shaking as I pushed off the cold floor. My feet barely made a sound as I moved, and I couldn't decide if that was a good thing or not. It was too quiet. The buzzing light above me was the only sound in the room, and it was maddening, its hum low and insistent, like it was calling to something, waiting for something. My hand brushed against the wall as I made my way across the room. The stone was slick with something wet, slime, sweat. I didn't want to know. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door, but when I touched the handle, I felt it, that feeling again. It wasn't just the air anymore. Something else was in here with me. I jerked my hand back, heart racing. The door handle felt warm, unnaturally warm, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I had to escape whatever this place was, whatever was lurking in the shadows. But before I could turn and look for another way out, I heard a sound, a soft, high-pitched scratching, like fingernails dragging across the floor. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up, my breath caught in my throat. The sound was faint at first, but then it grew louder, closer. It was coming from behind me. Slowly I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, fingers twisted in ways they shouldn't bend, dragging along the floor. It wasn't fully human. No, there was something wrong about it, about its eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and black as night, pupils dilated with a hunger I couldn't describe. It didn't move quickly. No, it moved deliberately, slowly. Each step calculated, each movement jagged, twitching as though it couldn't quite control itself. It was coming for me. I had to run. I spun toward the door again, but the handle, it was gone. The door was now nothing but a wall, smooth and featureless. My heart hammered in my chest as I slammed my fists against the stone, desperate to break through, but it was no use. There was no way out. I was trapped. The figure took another step forward, its movements almost too fluid, too wrong. And then it spoke. Its voice was low, deep, raspy, like it hadn't used its voice in centuries. "You can't leave." The words didn't come from its mouth. They were inside my head, in my thoughts, wrapping around me like vines. I staggered back, my feet tangling with something I couldn't see. I fell hard to the ground, but my eyes never left the figure. It was close now, too close. I could smell it rot. The stench of decay filled my lungs, making me gag. I tried to get up, tried to move, but my body was frozen, locked in place. "You're ours now." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The figure loomed over me, its long, thin arms reaching down, fingers curling like claws. I could see the tendons beneath its skin, stretching with every movement, its hands trembling as it got closer. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to escape, but my body wouldn't respond. And then it touched me. Its fingers were ice cold. No, they were colder than that. They felt like death, like everything I was being drained out of me, bit by bit. Its touch burned, and I could feel it inside me, crawling into my chest, twisting around my heart. I gasped, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but the figure didn't let go. It kept pulling deeper, and I felt myself fading like I was slipping away from the world. "We will never let you go." The whisper echoed in my ears, and the world around me shifted. The room was no longer just a room. It was nothing, an endless void of black abyss. I was floating, sinking into it, losing myself with every second. But then I heard something, a voice. Not from the figure, a different voice. "Run." It was soft, distant, but familiar. It was like it was me. I snapped my head around, but I couldn't see anything. The shadows were closing in, pulling me under. The figure was right there, still holding me, still dragging me into the abyss, but I could feel it. Something was fighting back. I took a breath. No, I forced myself to breathe. The walls around me began to tremble, shaking, cracking. The shadows hissed, pulling away, retreating as if they were afraid of something. The figure let out a hiss, a sound so violent, so full of fury, that it nearly deafened me. And then the light, the real light. It flooded the room, bright and blinding, washing away the darkness. The figure shrieked, its form melting, dissolving in the brightness. And in that moment, I felt the grip on me loosen, felt the cold fingers slip away. I ran as fast as I could, my feet pounding against the stone, my breath ragged, my chest burning. I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. The darkness was chasing me again, but I wasn't going to let it catch me. Not this time. Not again. I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was pushing back, trying to drag me down. The air felt thick, like I was wading through it, and no matter how hard I pushed myself forward, the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The light that had been so blinding just moments before, flickered, wavering like a candle in the wind. And then it went out. Everything went dark. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs as the blackness swallowed me whole. I couldn't see a thing. The floor beneath me felt uneven, shifting like the ground had a life of its own. I stumbled, my foot catching on something, sending me crashing forward. My hands hit something cold and slick, my palms burning from the impact. I didn't dare move, but I could feel it, the presence. It was back, and it was closer this time, A slow, deliberate sound reached my ears, scraping. The same sound from before. Only now, it wasn't just one thing making the noise. It was everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. It all seemed to shift, to breathe. The scratching, the dragging was moving around me, closing in from all sides, filling the space like an invisible storm. Something was waiting, watching. And then I heard the voice again. "You can't escape." It was low, raspy, almost a growl. The words slithered through the air, curling around me like smoke, choking the breath from my lungs. I clutched at the floor beneath me, trying to push myself up, but my arms felt like jelly, weak and useless. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I closed my eyes, tried to block out the sound, the feel, but it was everywhere. The whispering, the dragging. It was like the darkness itself was alive, crawling into my skin, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. Then I felt something touch me, a cold, wet sensation brushed against my arm, and I yelped, jerking away. I opened my eyes, heart racing, but there was nothing but the pitch black void around me. I could hear my pulse in my ears, the frantic rhythm matching my panicked breaths. I told myself to move, to run, but my body refused to obey. It was like something was holding me down, pressing me into the ground. And then, from the depths of the dark, I heard it again, the dragging. Closer, closer now. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was coming. Then a scream. Not mine. It was distant, almost echoing from a place I couldn't reach. The sound sent a chill through my bones, and I scrambled to my feet, hands shaking violently as I reached out, trying to find anything to grab onto. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet, too quiet. And then, the walls moved. It wasn't just the walls. It was the whole room. The floor beneath my feet gave way, sinking deeper into the earth, and the walls groaned, their edges curling and twisting like they were alive. The space around me shifted, bending and contorting, as if it were being squeezed. No. I tried to move, but my legs were frozen like I was trapped in cement. My heart pounded in my chest, and I gasped for air that wouldn't come. The room was folding in on itself, warping around me. I felt my skin crawl as the walls closed in, the floor slanting at an unnatural angle. The air, thick, sticky, pressed harder, making it impossible to think, impossible to breathe. And then I heard it, the scraping again, louder this time, closer than ever before. I turned, frantically searching for the source of the noise, but the shadows were too thick. The darkness was alive, moving in ways I couldn't understand. It wasn't just surrounding me anymore. It was inside me. The room, the whole place was alive. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. They were all breathing, exhaling, moving with a slow, unsettling rhythm, as if something ancient, something hungry, was stirring beneath it all. It was waiting, and I was trapped. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The air around me felt thick, heavy, suffocating. It was as if the very atmosphere was being sucked out of the room, pulled into the darkness that stretched endlessly around me. And then I saw it, a shape, a figure. It was just standing there, watching me from the far corner of the room. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its eyes, cold, calculating, unblinking. It wasn't human, not in the way I understood. Its shape shifted, flickered like it was a mirage, like it didn't belong in the same world as I did. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, dragging its feet. The thing wasn't moving on its own. No, something else was pulling it, pushing it. Its limbs were twisted, unnatural. Its body seemed to contort with every step, like it couldn't hold itself together. But still it moved, closer. I wanted to run. I had to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then it spoke. Its voice was deep, like gravel scraping against stone, low and guttural. You should have never come here. The words felt like they ripped through me, slashing at my very soul. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as though the walls were closing in tighter with every breath I took. I could feel it, feel it, the thing inside me. Its presence was like a weight pressing down on my chest, pressing down on my very thoughts. It was in my mind, crawling under my skin, filling my thoughts with shadows, with darkness, with fear. "You're ours now." The voice was all around me. I could hear it in my ears, feel it in my chest, in my bones. It was too much. The darkness was suffocating, crushing me from all sides. I couldn't breathe. And then, the ground gave way. I fell through the cracks of the room, through the endless darkness that had swallowed everything whole. There was nothing, no floor, no walls, just darkness. I fell and kept falling into the void. The darkness seemed to deepen, suffocating everything around me. The air had grown impossibly thick, the oppressive weight of it pushing down on my chest with every breath I took. My lungs ached, struggling to expand as if they too were being crushed under the weight of this cursed place. I couldn't focus on anything except the cold, the grip tightening on my wrist, and the sound, the horrible scraping sound that now felt like it was inside my head. The figure, that thing with the twisted face, pulled me forward, dragging me across the cold, jagged bones scattered on the floor. I could hear them cracking, breaking under my weight, the sharp edges scraping against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was too clouded with panic, with terror, to register anything but the relentless pull of that unseen force. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt raw, as if it had been scorched by the very air around me. The silence that followed my scream was worse than the screams themselves. It was a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to vibrate with the hum of something ancient, something beyond my comprehension. Every inch of me screamed to escape, to flee from this nightmare, but I was stuck, trapped in the grasp of something that didn't belong in this world. I glanced to my side and saw, in the farthest corner of my vision, the walls were moving. Not just shifting, but breathing, pulsing. The shadows clinging to them seemed to twist and stretch, as if they were alive and aware of my presence. The walls, now covered in cracks, looked like they were closing in on me, constricting the already claustrophobic space. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat a painful reminder that I was still here, still trapped, still alive in this nightmare. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, reached out in desperation, clawing at the floor, at the walls, at anything that might give me a way out. But all I touched were more bones, more skulls and broken limbs. I tried to push myself up, but the figure, the thing, was relentless, dragging me across the bone-strewn floor with terrifying ease. It was pulling me toward the center of the room, where the darkness was thickest, where the air felt heavier, like it had been soaked in despair. The closer we got to the center, the more I could feel it, the presence. There was something there, something just beyond the reach of the shadows, something far more terrifying than the twisted thing in front of me. I could almost hear it, feel it, moving in the darkness, watching, waiting. It was ancient, and it was hungry. I gasped, trying to break free from the creature's grasp, but its grip tightened, its long, cold fingers digging into my skin. I looked up, desperate, and met the empty sockets where its eyes should have been. The face, that horrid, contorted face, seemed to smile, but it wasn't a smile. It was something else, something cold, predatory, like it knew exactly what was going to happen to me. You cannot run from what is already inside you. The voice was so soft, so whispered, but it rattled through my bones, slithering into my mind. It felt like the words were pulling apart my thoughts, unraveling everything I knew, everything I was. The darkness around me seemed to respond to it, growing deeper, more suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I looked around wildly, my breath shallow, struggling to stay conscious, to stay sane. The walls were no longer just moving, they were alive. The cracks in them widened, and I could see something moving inside them. Creeping shadows, thin, sinuous tendrils writhing beneath the surface, like worms pushing through the earth. They reached toward me, lashing out with horrifying speed, and for a moment, I thought they were going to pull me in, drag me into the walls, into the darkness that lurked inside them. Then, everything stopped. The pulling, the scraping, The whispering, the presence. It all halted, dead silence. For one brief moment, I thought maybe I had finally snapped, that maybe none of this was real, that it was just my mind breaking apart under the weight of fear. But then I heard it again, a voice, but not the creature's voice. This one was different. It wasn't whispering. It was loud, clear. Get up. You have to fight. I looked around confused. The voice felt so real, so close, and yet it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was just there, hanging in the air like it had always been part of this nightmare. I didn't know why, but something about that voice, that command, spurred me into action. My legs trembled as I slowly, shakily, pulled myself to my feet, ignoring the bone fragments that dug into my palms as I pushed against the ground. The figure behind me hissed, and I could hear it moving again, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to look back. I had to move. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I staggered forward, my legs barely holding me up, my breath shallow, each step heavier than the last. The room seemed to stretch endlessly around me, the shadows closing in tighter, the air growing colder, denser. But I kept moving, my heart hammering in my chest, urging me on. I could feel it. The presence was moving, shifting behind me, stalking me, waiting for me to make a mistake. But I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. The walls around me were closing in, shifting and twisting, but they didn't matter. Not anymore. I had to escape. And then ahead of me, I saw it. A crack in the wall, just barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Light flickered beyond it, a strange, ghostly light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. Without thinking, I lunged for it, pushing myself through the narrow gap, scraping my arms and shoulders on the jagged edges of the stone. I didn't care. I had to get out. I forced my way through the crack, tumbling into a new space, a new room. The moment I was through, I fell to my knees, gasping for air, heart racing, trembling with exhaustion and fear. But then, I looked up, and my stomach dropped. The room I had entered wasn't much different from the last one. It was bigger, more open, but just as wrong. The shadows here seemed to move more freely, like they were alive, like they had a will of their own. And standing in the center of the room, bathed in that flickering, ghostly light, was something worse than the thing that had chased me. It was waiting, and this time, it wasn't just one thing. It was many, and they were all staring at me. The room, though larger, felt smaller now, encroaching, like the very air was thickening around me, drawing in tighter with every breath I took. I froze, my eyes locked onto the figures in the center of the room. There were too many to count, their bodies almost blending into the shadows themselves, as if they were made from the darkness. Some stood still, others shifted, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes with tangled strings. I couldn't tell if they were human. Their limbs were wrong, stretched in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Long fingers, twisted spines, faces that were barely faces at all, just twisted, hollow expressions. No eyes, no mouths. Only a mass of grotesque features that melted into one another. But even though their faces were blank, I could feel their gaze, cold, empty, yet full of malice, like they were waiting for something. Like they were waiting for me. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. I could barely breathe, every movement feeling like it was pulling me closer to the edge. My mind was screaming to run, to escape, but my body was frozen in place, my feet nailed to the cold stone floor. And then, as if sensing my fear, the air around me shifted. A low hum, like a distant chant, filled the room. It was almost imperceptible at first, like the buzzing of 1,000 flies just on the edge of hearing. But it grew louder, thicker, until it was a heavy, suffocating force. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, as if they were alive, breathing, vibrating, resonating with an energy that crawled beneath my skin, tugging at the very core of my being. The figures didn't move, but I could feel them drawing closer, closing in around me. It was like they were converging silently, their weight pressing in on me until the room felt like it was shrinking. The space was warping, the shadows bending and stretching like they were alive, reaching toward me, creeping closer, inch by inch. My body trembled, the weight of their presence suffocating. My skin was crawling, every nerve alive with fear, with dread. I couldn't think. I couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming sensation that something was wrong here, deeply wrong. My throat felt dry, and I couldn't make a sound, couldn't force any words out, though my mind was screaming for help. And then I saw it, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a movement too quick to follow. I whipped my head around, my breath catching in my throat. But it wasn't a figure. It wasn't one of them. It was something else. A shadow, a flickering shape, barely visible, darting through the corners of the room, moving faster than any human could. It was alive, it seemed to be, and it was coming toward me. I didn't even have time to react. The shadow rushed forward, engulfing the space between us in an instant. Before I could even take a step back, something cold and sharp wrapped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I screamed, but no sound came out. The darkness around me thickened, and I could feel myself being pulled, dragged, toward the center of the room, closer to the figures, closer to whatever was waiting for me. The shadow around my ankle tightened, pulling me forward, and I tried to claw at the ground, my fingers scrabbling at the stone, but it was no use. My body was being dragged with unnatural strength, the floor scraping against my skin, burning with every inch I was pulled forward. I looked up, and for the briefest moment, I saw something shift in the shadows. One of the figures, its twisted form moving, sliding like liquid, its hollow face now inches from mine. It was smiling, not with a mouth, but with something far worse. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hunger. "Run," the voice in my head whispered again, but it wasn't the same voice from before. This one was different. This one was worse. It was darker, twisted, and full of something that scraped at my soul. "Run, or it will be too late." Too late? Before I could even comprehend the warning, the darkness that surrounded me seemed to shift. The walls groaned, and I felt a cold breeze rush past me, carrying with it the scent of decay, of something ancient, something that had been lying dormant for centuries. The shadows twisted and stretched, and I could hear voices, whispers low and guttural, seeping from the walls, crawling through my mind, speaking words I couldn't understand. They were getting louder, and then, out of nowhere, a burst of light. Bright, blinding. It cut through the suffocating dark like a knife, forcing the shadows back, illuminating the room for the first time. I blinked, disoriented, my eyes burning from the sudden brightness. And when I could finally see clearly again, I realized something had changed. The figures were no longer just staring at me. They were moving, shuffling forward, their long limbs jerking unnaturally as they closed in on me. Their faces, those hollow, distorted faces, twisted in grotesque mockeries of smiles. I could hear them now, not just in my mind, but out loud, whispering in a language that scraped against the edges of sanity. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone, it was filled with laughter. Low, mocking, and cruel. One of the figures reached out, its hand stretching unnaturally long, like the arm of some nightmare creature. Its fingers brushed against my cheek, cold as ice, sending a wave of icy dread through me. I flinched, recoiling from the touch, but the figure didn't stop. It moved closer, its arm extending, its fingers curling around my throat. The pressure was crushing. I gasped, my vision narrowing, my body screaming for air as its grip tightened. The world around me spun. The shadows were closing in again, everything fading to darkness, but I couldn't escape. I couldn't move. The cold was everywhere, suffocating me. And just as I thought I would pass out, just as the last bit of my consciousness began to slip away, I heard it again. A voice. Louder now. Get out. The words weren't from the thing holding me. They weren't from the figures around me. This voice was different. It was the same voice from before, the one that had urged me to fight. With every ounce of strength left, I reached out, scratching, clawing, my hands finding purchase on the cold stone floor. I forced my hand forward, ignoring the burning sensation in my lungs and my throat. I reached for the light, and in that moment, something snapped. The world shifted. The shadows recoiled, like they were afraid of the light, retreating as if they were being burned by its presence. The grip on my throat loosened, and I gasped, air flooding my lungs, my vision clearing as the figure, whatever it was, screeched an unholy sound and retreated into the darkness. But it wasn't gone. I could still feel its presence. The cold, the hunger. I had only bought myself time. I had to get out. The air was thick with an unnatural chill that seemed to wrap itself around my lungs, squeezing the breath from my chest as I stumbled through the room. My eyes darted around, searching for any escape, any crack in the walls, any sign of light that might lead me to safety. But the shadows were closing in again, thick and suffocating, wrapping themselves around me like ropes, tugging at my limbs, pulling me back toward the center of the room where the figures waited, watching. They were still there, standing in their twisted, grotesque forms, unmoving. But somehow I knew they were aware of every step I took. Their hollow faces, those dead, featureless masks, seemed to follow my every movement, like they were feeding on my fear, savoring every second of my panic. I could feel them getting closer, even though they hadn't moved an inch. It was as if the air itself was thickening around me, pressing me down, forcing me to stay still, to stop running, to face whatever it was that they wanted. I tried to move faster, but the floor beneath me was slick with something I couldn't see but could feel. It was cold like oil or slime, and it made every step harder, more deliberate, like the ground itself was trying to hold me in place. I felt my foot slip, my body pitching forward, but I caught myself just in time, my hands scraping against the stone wall for balance. My heart was racing, each beat a painful thump in my chest, but the darkness around me seemed to get heavier, suffocating, the shadows now thick enough to feel like tangible, suffocating hands. I heard something then, a low, raspy sound, almost like whispering, but not words, just a sound like breath scraping through dead leaves. It was coming from behind me, and I knew without turning that it wasn't just one of them. It was more than one. They were moving, slowly, hungrily. I couldn't bring myself to look back. My eyes were fixed ahead, staring at the narrow gap in the far wall, the only possible way out. But it felt so far away, too far. The shadows, those long, writhing things, seemed to stretch toward me like hands reaching from the darkness, fingers flexing, brushing against my skin. I could hear them now, just behind me, as if they were inches away, too close, and yet every time I turned to face them, they vanished, disappearing into the corners, the darkened spaces where they belonged. But I felt them. I felt their presence, their hunger, growing with every step I took. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me, shrinking the space with each passing second. My breath was shallow, frantic, my thoughts a blur of desperation and terror. Every instinct screamed for me to run, to move, but my feet felt heavy, like they were rooted to the ground, unable to escape the grip of the shadows. And then, just as I thought I could go no further, the floor beneath me cracked. A deep, echoing snap, like something ancient and broken giving way, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I didn't want to look down, but I couldn't help it. My gaze fell to the floor, and that's when I saw it. The crack. It was spreading, widening, and from it, something was emerging. Something black. Something alive. I took a step back, my hands shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. The crack kept expanding, the darkness pouring out of it like ink, flooding the room, crawling along the floor toward me. It was like the darkness had a life of its own, moving, stretching, gathering speed. And I could hear it now, the faintest sound of scraping, like claws dragging across stone. Suddenly, something shot from the crack, faster than I could even react. It wrapped around my leg, cold and slick, pulling me off my feet with the force of 100 hands. I screamed. This time the sound escaped my throat, raw and desperate. But it was swallowed by the darkness, absorbed by the thing pulling me toward the center of the room. My hands clawed at the stone, at the air, anything to break free, but it was no use. The pull was relentless, dragging me closer to the figures, to that twisted, suffocating center where the shadows were thickest. I could feel the cold, slick presence of the thing touching me now, wrapping around my torso, my arms, my face, until I was surrounded by it. I could hear it breathing, deep, wet, like something alive, and it smelled wrong, like rot, like decay, like something that had been festering in the dark for centuries. I couldn't breathe. The darkness was suffocating me, filling my lungs with its bitter, choking air. The figures, those twisted, soulless things, were closer now, their heads turning slowly, their empty eyes fixed on me, as if they had all the time in the world. I could feel their gaze, cold, empty, hollow, and it burned. It burned in a way that no fire ever could. And then it happened. The room shifted. The air thickened even more, becoming a tangible weight pressing down on me, pushing me into the floor. The darkness seemed to surge, grow, like it was alive, swelling, as if feeding off the fear, the desperation in the air. The walls groaned, the floor cracked again, and the shadows seemed to writhe with a new hunger. And in that moment I knew it wasn't just them anymore. The room wasn't just alive. It was feeding on me. The thing in the shadows, the one that had been waiting, lurking just out of sight, was closer now. I could hear its breath, like a slow, low growl vibrating through the walls. Its presence was like ice, but something far worse than cold. Something ancient, something far older than the world itself. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, as the weight of the room, the weight of the shadows, pressed harder, suffocating, pushing me down. And then, from somewhere far above, I heard a laugh. It was low, wet, and full of malice. It sounded like it had been waiting forever to feast. I could barely hold on to my consciousness as my vision blurred, my heart pounding in my ears, my breath ragged. Everything around me was warping, shifting, bending like it was losing its form, like it was becoming something else. But the figure, the thing, was still there. And now it was moving toward me. Slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring the moment. I couldn't escape. I couldn't fight. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I fought against the weight, the grip on my body, pushing with every ounce of strength I had left. I could feel the coldness trying to consume me, pull me into the abyss, but I refused to give in. I forced my eyes open, staring at the one thing I knew I had to reach, the light in the distance. It was faint, just a flicker, but it was there. I could see it, and I was going to reach it. I had no choice. The figures were closing in, but I was not going to be their next victim. Not today. Not ever. I pushed through the pain, through the fear, the darkness wrapping around my limbs, pulling at my soul, and I started crawling toward the light. I kept crawling, my hands trembling as they scraped against the cold, jagged stone beneath me. Each movement felt like it took everything I had left, the shadows pressing in from all sides, eager to drag me back into their suffocating embrace. The light, that faint flicker I had spotted before, seemed so far away now, like a distant star in a sky of endless night. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me like 100 invisible hands. Every breath I took felt like I was inhaling something dark, something alive. The darkness itself seemed to pulse, shifting, moving just out of the corner of my eye, always just out of reach. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to slow down, to give up. I could almost hear it, an insidious whisper that slithered into my mind, promises of relief if I just gave in. But I wasn't going to listen, not this time. As I crawled, I thought I saw something moving in the darkness ahead. A figure? No, a shadow. Too quick to be real, too fluid. It flickered like a mirage, vanishing when I tried to focus on it. But I knew it was there. I could feel it, someone was following me. Panic surged through me, making my chest tighten. I scrambled faster, my fingers numb, my legs weak. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The shadow seemed to draw closer with each desperate push forward, like it was feeding off my fear, growing stronger, faster. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I didn't want to see what was behind me. But the sound, it was growing louder now. A low, scraping noise that seemed to echo from all directions. It was almost like claws. No, scratching, something dragging across stone, just a few feet behind me. I could feel the coldness of it, a presence just beyond my reach, creeping closer, the air around me thickening with a sense of dread. I thought I heard breathing too, shallow, raspy, almost gurgling, like something was struggling to take in air. The sound was so close, I could almost feel the heat of it on the back of my neck. It was right there. I pushed myself forward harder, the light up ahead still a distant, unreachable speck. It had to be the way out. It had to be. If I could just make it there, maybe I could escape this nightmare. Maybe I could outrun whatever was behind me. But as I reached out, my hand brushing the cold stone in front of me, the air shifted again. Something in the darkness was moving, and I wasn't alone anymore. The space around me twisted, and I felt the walls breathe. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew with sickening clarity that something was wrong. Wrong in a way that words couldn't explain. The whispering grew louder. The walls themselves seemed to be whispering now, voices. Many voices, but they weren't human. They were guttural, deep, and all of them were saying the same thing. Come back. I jerked my head up. There it was again. The shadow, a dark shape moving closer. Its form too blurred to make sense of, like it was phasing in and out of existence. But now it was more than just a shape. I could see it now, clearer than before. It was a person without a face, without eyes, just skin stretched tight over bone, and it was coming toward me. I gasped, the air in my lungs catching painfully. I could feel its presence now, pressing against my back like it was right there breathing down my neck. I dared a glance over my shoulder, just for a split second, and what I saw made my stomach churn. There was nothing, just empty darkness. No figure, no shape, no sound. But the air, it was different. It felt heavier, thicker. It was closing in around me, and I realized with a sickening jolt that the darkness wasn't just behind me anymore. It was surrounding me. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all closing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was trapped. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the pressure stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. The whispering faded. The scratching stopped. The air seemed to settle. My pulse was still racing, but the dread that had been choking me just moments before seemed to have vanished. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening anymore. I kept moving forward, cautiously now, each step more hesitant than the last. The light was still there, but it felt farther away than before, as if the room itself was shifting, warping, the exit slipping further and further from reach. Then there was again that noise, a scraping, dragging sound, but this time it wasn't behind me. It was coming from above. I looked up. The ceiling that had once seemed solid, stable, was now bending, warping. I could see something moving up there, shadows crawling across the stone like they were alive, shifting with purpose. My heart skipped a beat as someone dropped from above, landing with a heavy thud right in front of me. I froze. It was a figure, not like the others, not twisted, not disjointed. This one was real, or at least it looked real. A man, a woman? I couldn't tell. Their face was covered by a black veil, their body cloaked in tattered robes. And in their hand, they held something, a key. But this wasn't any ordinary key. It was long, twisted, corroded, like it had been buried in the earth for centuries. The metal gleamed in the faint light, but it was old, too old, as if it had never been touched by time. The figure stood still, unmoving, watching me. Their presence was oppressive, like their very being was a weight pressing down on my chest. "You shouldn't have come here," they whispered, their voice low and cracked, like it had been buried in the dark for far too long. I didn't understand. "It's too late now," they continued, their voice sharp and full of something I couldn't place. I backed away instinctively, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, the key dangling from their hand, almost as if it were waiting. "Take the key," they said. "You'll need it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask what the hell was going on, why I was here, and what they wanted from me. But something in their eyes, or rather, the place where their eyes should have been, told me that it wasn't a question I was meant to ask. I glanced at the key again, and for a moment, I considered turning and running. But there was something pulling me toward it, something I couldn't resist. The air shifted again. The whispering grew louder. "Take it." The darkness seemed to swell, pressing in from all sides, and I knew that I had no choice. I reached for the key. My fingers brushed against the cold, rusted metal, and the moment I touched it, a shock of ice shot up my arm, like something alive had jolted through my body. I gasped, pulling my hand back instinctively, but the key didn't fall. It stayed there, suspended in mid-air, as if it had been waiting for me to take it, as if it knew I would. I had no choice but to grip it fully now, my palm trembling around the ancient, twisted metal. The moment I held it, I felt something shift. The room seemed to exhale a breath, like a pressure had been released. Only, it wasn't a feeling of freedom. It was more like the calm before a storm. The figure still stood there, its face hidden beneath the veil, but I could feel its eyes, or at least the empty space where its eyes should have been. I couldn't look away, couldn't break the tension that wrapped around us like a vice. "Now you've done it," the figure whispered, its voice almost musical, as if mocking me. "The door is open. The door is always open." I didn't understand. I wanted to ask what door it meant, but the air was so thick now, so heavy, it felt like something was pressing against my chest. The shadows, which had seemed to retreat for a moment, were now gathering again. Closer. They were closer. I could feel them moving, slithering along the walls, across the floor, almost like they were alive. It was as if the room itself had become a creature, its walls pulsing, breathing. I turned toward the far wall. The narrow crack of light I had seen earlier, the one I had hoped would be my escape, was now growing wider, more intense. It was no longer just a crack, it was a door, but it wasn't just a normal door. No, this one was wrong. The edges of the light seemed to warp and bend, almost like the door was made of liquid, like it wasn't quite solid. The air around it crackled, as if reality itself was warping, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. And then I heard it, a low, deep sound like a growl, vibrating through the floor. It was coming from the door. "It's hungry," the figure whispered again, almost lovingly, as if it took pleasure in my confusion. It always has been. I didn't want to know what that meant. I knew what it meant, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. The shadows seemed to be moving faster now, their presence thicker, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The walls themselves were shifting, the cracks growing wider, as if they were trying to swallow me whole. I had the key in my hand. I knew I had to use it, but there was something stopping me, something deep inside that told me I wasn't ready, that I wasn't meant to open that door. The key felt wrong in my hand. It was cold, too cold, and the longer I held it, the more the darkness seemed to press in around me, squeezing tighter and tighter. The whispers from the walls grew louder, incoherent, like 1,000 voices were murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. I glanced at the figure. "You can't stop it," it said, its voice growing distant, like it was fading. "The door is always open. It knows you. It has always known you." The shadows were almost at my feet now, moving in waves, licking at the edges of the stone floor like they were alive, eager to consume me. My chest was tight with fear, my breath shallow, as I stood there, key in hand, too afraid to move, too afraid to open the door. The figure's laughter echoed in the room, soft at first, then growing louder, more menacing. It didn't sound human, not anymore. It sounded like a thing from the dark, something ancient, something that had been here before. "It will come for you," the figure crooned, its words seeping into my skin, cold and sharp, like needles. "It will come, no matter how far you run." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to be closing in again. The walls, the shadows, they were coming for me. I could feel them pulling at my skin, at my very soul. I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. But then, something shifted. The door. The door began to tremble. It was alive. I realized then, it was alive. The light flickered, erratic, like a heartbeat in the dark. And then it happened. The door snapped open with a violent crack, releasing a gust of wind so cold it froze the breath in my lungs. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners of the room, as if they feared what was beyond that threshold. The wind howled, a piercing, unnatural scream that made my bones ache. I had to move. I didn't have a choice anymore. I took a step toward the door, but the figure's voice stopped me. "It's already too late," it hissed, its voice thick with malice. "You've let it in." I felt a tremor in the air, like something huge was on the other side of that door, something that had been waiting, watching for me to open it. And just as I took another step, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. Then the whispering, no screaming began again. Louder, closer, all around me. It was coming from the door, and it was coming for me. Without thinking, I shoved the key into the door's lock. And as it turned, everything went black. For a moment, I couldn't feel anything. There was no sound, no movement, just an endless, oppressive weight pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. It was like I was suspended in some dark, cold void, nothingness swallowing me whole. Then, a coldness pierced through the darkness. It felt like ice, but sharper, like someone was scraping at my skin with jagged nails. I gasped, instinctively trying to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. My chest tightened, and I could barely get any air in. I was suffocating, but I wasn't alone. There was something else, something close. The whispering started again, low and insistent, like voices murmuring just beneath the surface of my mind. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone, it was sickening. They were too familiar, too close, like they had always been with me, always in my head, even when I thought I was alone. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't move. My limbs were heavy like they were made of stone, and I could feel something crawling over me. Not the shadows, not the darkness. This was something else, something worse. It slid across my skin like it was alive, cold and wet, a creeping sensation that made my heart race. It was everywhere, on my arms, my face, my chest. It crawled beneath my clothes, clinging to my skin like 1,000 little hands. I tried to fight it, tried to move, but I couldn't. The weight, the pressure, it was too much. My heart was thudding in my chest, the pounding sound filling my ears. And then, a voice. Soft. So soft. Barely a whisper. But it was there. It was in my ear. "You shouldn't have opened it," it said, its voice sweet and cruel, like a lullaby turned sinister. "Now you belong to it." The words chilled me more than the cold ever could. I tried to push the voice away, to block it out, but it wrapped itself around my thoughts, tangled itself in my mind. "It sees you now," the voice continued. "It knows you, knows everything about you." I couldn't stop it. I could feel it now, clawing at the back of my mind, invading my thoughts. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I had opened the door. I had invited it in. The pressure on my chest grew. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, suffocating, until it felt like I was being crushed beneath the weight of 1,000 eyes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I needed to move. I needed to escape. And then, a sound, a deep, resonating thump. It came from somewhere far below me, shaking the very air, rattling my bones. It was like the ground was shifting, groaning under some immense weight. I could feel it through the floor, through the walls, vibrating through my body. And then the whispering stopped. Complete silence. For a brief moment, I dared to hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had all been a trick, a hallucination. But then, the ground cracked. I felt it first. Underneath me, a deep, terrible sound like the earth was breaking apart. I instinctively stepped back, but the ground was already splitting. Cracks spread across the floor, jagged and sharp, like broken glass. The dark void beneath me seemed to swallow the light, pulling everything down into it. From the cracks, something emerged, slowly, deliberately. Something large, something massive, something that wasn't meant to be. It was like a shadow made of flesh, dark, slick, and shifting. It didn't have a clear shape, more like a writhing mass of darkness, tendrils of it creeping across the floor like oily smoke. It crawled up the walls, reaching for me, stretching, tasting the air. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted in place, my body frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't. I could only watch in horror as the mass of shadows grew. And then it spoke. "We are here." The voice was wrong, not human. It was more like 1,000 voices layered over one another, all speaking at once, filling my mind, distorting everything. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe, and the weight of it all was overwhelming. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the whole world was collapsing around me. "We've always been here," it continued. "You are ours now." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but there was nothing. No escape, no way out. The shadows grew, curling, reaching, until they were almost at my feet. I could feel them creeping up my legs, crawling beneath my skin, like they were invading my body. I felt something sharp, something cold, slide into me, inside me. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a hand. It was just presence. A force, cold and suffocating. I felt it sink deeper into my chest. My heart pounded, but the blood was freezing. "Don't struggle," the voice said, calm and final. "We are inside you now." I didn't know if I could take it anymore. My skin felt like it was burning, like something was tearing through me from the inside out. The pressure was unbearable. My hands twitched. I tried to move, tried to scream, but then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The darkness lifted. The weight, the pressure, the voices, all of it faded. The shadows, the thing, vanished as if they were never there. I was left standing in an empty room, breathing heavily, my heart racing. The air was still and quiet now, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel it, deep inside me. The door, it was still there. It hadn't closed. It was waiting, and I knew. It wasn't just a door. It was a gateway, and it was calling me back. The door was still there. I could feel it, even though I hadn't dared to move closer. The darkness beyond it seemed thicker now, almost alive, swirling and beckoning like a living thing. The air around me was stale, heavy with a coldness that burned against my skin, like I was standing on the edge of something vast, something endless. I backed away, but my feet didn't want to obey. It was as if the room itself was holding me in place, refusing to let go. My legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor with each step I took, the shadows curling around my ankles, teasing, pulling just out of reach. The door, however, remained perfectly still, but the faint sound that came from behind it, that soft hum, it made my blood run cold. It wasn't a sound I could describe, not exactly. It wasn't the wind or the creak of old wood. It was something much deeper, more otherworldly. It felt like a vibration in the very air itself, like the door was vibrating with a force that had no business being here. It was calling to me. I tried to force my body to move, tried to ignore the pull, but I couldn't. It was as if the door knew me, knew exactly how to make me stay. I looked at it one last time. The cracks in the wall seemed to be widening now, as if the room was breathing, slow, deliberate inhales and exhales, dragging the air from my lungs. A crack of light, a sliver that I hadn't noticed before, was now spilling from the gap between the door and the frame. It was an unnatural light, not warm or comforting, but harsh and biting, flickering like an old light bulb about to die. I had to leave, but even as the thought crossed my mind, I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on that sliver of light. Something inside me wanted to reach for it, and I did. I took a step toward the door, my fingers outstretched, trembling. The moment my hand brushed against the wood, a violent shock coursed through me, far worse than the jolt I had felt earlier with the key. This time it wasn't just cold. It was wrong. Something sharp, something alive, was pushing back from the other side. It felt like claws, icy and jagged, scraping across my bones, as if the door itself had a grip on me, pulling me into the darkness. I jerked my hand away, heart racing, but the door didn't release me. Instead, it groaned, a low, guttural sound like something ancient, something trapped, trying to break free. And then, the door opened. Not slowly, not with a creak, but with a violent snap. The room went completely dark as the light from beyond disappeared. I could hear something moving through the void, like slow, dragging steps that felt wrong, like they were scraping across the floor, as if whatever was on the other side didn't belong here. I took a step back, but the air shifted. It thickened, and then, through the darkness, I heard it. A low, raspy breath, too close. And before I could react, something moved fast. I spun around, but it was too late. A hand, cold and clammy, grabbed my wrist, and I screamed, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. But the hand didn't feel human. It was too long, the fingers too thin and bony, the skin stretched tight over them, like something unnatural had taken hold. I tried to shake it off, tried to pull away, but it was stronger than anything I could comprehend. It was pulling me toward the door, pulling me into the darkness that threatened to consume me. I could feel the heat of it, the suffocating heat seeping into my skin, my bones burning me from the inside out. My body shook uncontrollably, but I couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop being dragged toward the door. The whispers came again, louder now, a cacophony of voices, all speaking over one another. "You shouldn't have opened it," one voice hissed, but it didn't sound human anymore. "It has always been here. It has always been waiting. You are its now," another voice purred, its tone too sweet, like syrup dripping over broken glass. "It knows you," came yet another, darker voice. "It always has." I could feel the door now, right behind me. The air on the other side of it was cold and thick, so thick I could taste it. And then I heard the sound, the dragging, scraping noise. And it was close, too close. I turned, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I caught a glimpse of the thing that had been waiting. It wasn't fully in the room yet, but I could see its eyes. Its eyes. They were black, empty, yet filled with an emptiness so deep I felt like I was falling into it. Its body was not a body at all, not really. It was like a shadow made flesh, sinewy and contorted, with arms that stretched too long and legs that twisted and buckled unnaturally, as if it had no true form, but was simply trying to take one. It was moving toward me now, faster than I could follow, its jagged movements like something out of a nightmare. I tried to scream, tried to push away, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was stuck, frozen in place by something far worse than fear. The shadows that had been lurking in the room before were no longer just shadows. They were now alive, swirling and twisting around the thing, like it was calling them to it, feeding them. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the key. It was on the floor, glinting in the dim light, almost mocking me. It was still there. I couldn't stop myself. I bent down, fingers trembling, and grabbed it. The moment my hand closed around the cold metal, a terrible pressure hit me, like the air itself was being crushed out of my lungs. The shadows seemed to shudder, recoiling from the key as if it was something they feared. And then, as if the door had been waiting for me to finally make a choice, it slammed open, fully, violently. And the thing stepped into the room. And the air shattered. At first, it was slow, almost casual, as if it didn't even care about me, as if I was just another shadow in its path. But the floor shook beneath its steps. The walls groaned like they were about to buckle under its weight. The room grew colder, colder than it had been before. I could feel the chill crawling into my bones, turning my veins to ice, spreading like a wildfire inside me. It moved closer, its body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Its legs bent at odd angles, like they didn't know what direction they should go. The thing had no shape I could understand, just a twisted mess of shadows, like its body was trying to form itself, but couldn't quite get it right. Its eyes, those black pits, were locked onto me. It knew I was there, knew I could see it, and it wanted me to see it. Those eyes were so empty, so utterly void, that they sucked everything else out of the room. The silence became unbearable, pressing in on me, thick and suffocating. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry, like it had been coated in dust. My breath was ragged, and each time I tried to suck in air, it felt like something was blocking my chest, like the very air itself was against me. The thing stopped right in front of me, its head tilted to the side, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer in those eyes. A flicker of something ancient, something that had always been there. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered. The voice was so faint, so soft. It was like it was right next to my ear, but I couldn't tell where it came from. It wasn't coming from its mouth. It was just inside me, in my mind, threading through my thoughts. "You were never meant to open it." I wanted to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. It was like I'd forgotten how to speak. "It is hungry," the voice continued, its tone now almost tender, like a parent speaking to a child. "It feeds on you, on your fear." I could feel the tremor in my hands. My pulse was racing, and the thing sensed it, knew it. Its body twitched, moved, like it was reacting to the rhythm of my heartbeat. "It has been waiting so long," it hummed, its form rippling with the sound of 1,000 whispers. "Now it has you. It has always had you." I wanted to look away, wanted to break the connection, but the thing's gaze held me captive. It wasn't just looking at me. It was looking through me, digging into my memories, finding everything I had ever tried to forget. I felt it rummaging through my mind, pulling things out, exposing things I thought were long buried. It knows me. I felt my legs shaking, my arms. My entire body was trembling as the darkness around the thing spread, pooling into the corners of the room, swallowing the light. The shadows seemed to breathe, exhaling cold, heavy breaths that sank into my skin. The air tasted wrong, like metal, like something rotten, like decay. I couldn't stand it. I had to get out. I reached for the door, instinctively, but the moment my hand touched the cold wood, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest, like ice had stabbed me from the inside. I screamed, though it felt like the sound was being swallowed by the dark. The door bucked against my touch, like it was alive, like it was pushing me back. "You can't leave," the voice rasped, and now it was louder, sharper, like 1,000 claws scraping against glass. "It's here now. It's inside you." The shadows in the room thickened, twisting tighter, suffocating. I could hear something skittering, scraping across the floor, moving in unnatural ways, like it was crawling from the cracks, the gaps in the walls. I could feel the darkness closing in, pulling everything into itself, a whirlpool of black that threatened to consume me. I gasped, panicked, trying to make my legs move, but they were like stone, like they were rooted to the ground. Every step I took felt like walking through mud, thick, sticky, pulling me down. "It's feeding on your fear," the voice whispered again, sweet and slow, like it was savoring every word. "It's feeding on your weakness." I fought against it. I tried to push away, tried to break free, but the darkness was too strong. It clung to me, wrapping around my body like a suffocating blanket. It was alive, and it was choking me. I could feel its fingers digging into my ribs, curling around my throat, tightening with every breath I took. "You'll never escape," it breathed, and this time, its voice was deep, like it was coming from everywhere. "You're already part of it. You always have been." I screamed again, a ragged, desperate sound that felt like it was tearing my insides apart. I could feel my chest tightening, my heart racing, as though my body was betraying me. And then something shifted. For a brief moment, there was silence. The thing stepped back in the shadows. They stopped. I didn't understand it at first. The room was still dark, but the suffocating pressure had lifted for just a moment. My breath was ragged, but I could breathe again. My legs moved slowly, shakily, but they moved. I took a step back, away from the door, away from the thing that had been looming over me. But the relief was short-lived. I heard it, a click. It was the sound of the door locking. It had closed. It had locked me in. The walls trembled again, and this time I felt it. The thing wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving, crawling closer, the air around me warping, thickening with its presence. And then from the other side of the room, I saw it. A shadow, creeping out from the cracks, reaching toward me with long, thin fingers stretching across the floor. I tried to run, but the room was too small, too tight. and the door was locked, my only escape gone. The thing was coming. It was coming for me, and I couldn't outrun it. I turned, panic surging through me as the shadow moved, stretching closer, crawling across the floor like it was alive. My feet were glued to the ground, my breath shallow and quick, my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Every movement felt sluggish, as if the air itself was heavy, holding me in place. The darkness around me seemed to press harder, pushing me toward the thing that waited in the corner, its figure now almost fully formed. It wasn't just shadows anymore. It had a shape, but it was wrong. It was like something out of a nightmare, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its face a twisted mask of emptiness. The blackness that had once been a mere absence of light now seemed to pulse alive, like a beating heart. I could feel it, hear it, in the pit of my stomach. The silence broke with a loud crack, like something snapping in the air, followed by a faint scratching sound. The thing's eyes, those deep, dark holes, stared directly at me, and I knew it wasn't just looking at me. It was looking through me. I felt my mind begin to fragment, my thoughts slipping away, the room spinning. "You shouldn't have opened the door," the voice whispered again, but this time, it was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar, a storm of words crashing. Just a whisper. It was a roar, a storm of words crashing against my thoughts, shaking everything inside me. "It's too late now. It knows you." My heart raced in my chest, but I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop the fear from flooding me, the terror that was drowning me. I felt the walls closing in, the very air around me thickening, like it was solidifying. The darkness was no longer just a thing around me. It was inside me. I could feel it, sinking into my skin, crawling through my veins. It was feeding on my fear, growing stronger, more powerful with every breath I took. I tried to scream again, but the sound was strangled, trapped in my throat. I tried to run, but the shadows had wrapped around my legs, pulling me back toward the thing in the corner. I felt its cold, clammy breath on my neck, and I knew I was going to be consumed by it. It moved faster now, skittering across the floor, its long, twisted arms reaching for me, its body uncoiling like a snake preparing to strike. The walls seemed to ripple with it, like the very structure of the room was warping under its presence. Every step I took to escape, every desperate move I made felt like I was walking through thick mud, each step slower, each breath harder. And then, just as I thought it was over, just as the thing's fingers brushed against my skin, a sudden jolt of energy shot through me. My vision blurred, my chest tightened, and I felt my body involuntarily jerk to the side, slamming into the cold floor. But I wasn't alone. I heard a sound, a low, grinding noise like something shifting, something awakening. The floor beneath me cracked open, a dark, gaping hole tearing through the wood, revealing an abyss that seemed to stretch on forever. From the depths of the hole, a low growl echoed, and I could feel the heat, the power, the hunger rising from below. The thing, the shadow that had been tormenting me, recoiled in fear. I could barely move, but I could feel it. The pull, the draw, the thing in the hole wanted me. It had been waiting for me, just as the shadow had said. I was its prey, its feast, and now it was finally going to claim me. But as I looked down into the abyss, the world around me began to fade. I could hear nothing, see nothing, only the endless blackness of the hole. And then a voice, not the voice of a shadow. No, this was something different. This voice was ancient, guttural, and it whispered my name. I felt my skin crawl as if invisible hands were wrapping around me, dragging me toward the hole. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't escape. In the last moments, before everything went black, I saw something. Someone standing at the edge of the abyss. A figure familiar, yet not quite. They reached out, their hands stretching toward me, and I heard their voice, soft and cold. "It's time." And then nothing.